Hey everybody, this is Sleepy Crime, and today I'm gonna help you. I know you want to fall asleep to this video, so before you do, put a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. By the way, where are you from and what time are you watching? Make yourself comfortable and relax. Hannah Elizabeth Graham was an 18-year-old sophomore at the University of Virginia, known for her academic drive and vibrant personality. Originally from Northern Virginia, she had a passion for music, athletics, and British culture, stemming from time spent in England. On Friday, September 12, 2014, she joined friends for a night out in Charlottesville. It was a typical evening for many college students: bars, friends, late-night strolls. She left an off-campus party alone around midnight. Surveillance footage and later analysis would show her walking east on the downtown mall, a pedestrian area filled with shops and restaurants. At 1:20 a.m., she sent a text to a friend saying she was lost, which was the last known communication from her. Cameras from businesses along the route captured her movements. She appeared unsteady at points, sometimes stumbling. At approximately 1:45 a.m., footage showed her walking with a man later identified as Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr., a local man known in the area. He was seen putting his arm around her. Witnesses recalled seeing the two together that night. Hannah did not return home that night. When her friends realized the next morning that she hadn't been seen or heard from, they contacted police. Her parents were alerted shortly thereafter. Her sudden disappearance triggered concern, but no one yet understood the scale of what had occurred. By that Sunday, news of her disappearance had reached regional and national media. Students, faculty, and residents joined the growing search efforts, while law enforcement began collecting evidence, reviewing surveillance, and conducting interviews. Hannah Graham had vanished without a trace, and the city of Charlottesville was gripped by the urgent question: where was she? As the hours turned to days, the urgency surrounding Hannah Graham's disappearance intensified. By Monday, September 15th, the Charlottesville Police Department officially classified her as missing under suspicious circumstances. Chief Timothy Longo addressed the media, asking for the public's help and emphasizing the seriousness of the case. Posters bearing Hannah's image were plastered across the city. Volunteers, many of them UVA students and residents, canvassed neighborhoods, combed wooded areas, and distributed flyers. Social media campaigns, bolstered by the hashtag #HelpFindHannah, amplified awareness across the country. Tips began pouring in: sightings, suspicions, and recollections. Investigators began reconstructing her path. Surveillance videos were collected from various locations downtown. The footage showed a young woman matching Hannah's description in the early morning hours of September 13th. In one clip, she was seen outside a Shell gas station on Preston Avenue. A figure later identified as Jesse Matthew appeared in the same footage. Another video from a nearby restaurant showed them together, walking toward the downtown area. Police interviews with friends and witnesses added context. Hannah had been drinking that night, which may have contributed to her disorientation. She was last positively seen around 1:45 a.m. with Matthew, who was also at the Tempo restaurant and bar that evening. He had left shortly after her, drawing further scrutiny. The search extended into surrounding areas. A reward fund quickly grew, reaching tens of thousands of dollars. Law enforcement agencies, including the FBI and Virginia State Police, joined the investigation. Specialized K-9 units and helicopters assisted in the expanding search radius. On September 19th, police executed a search warrant at Jesse Matthews' apartment. He had agreed to meet with investigators but left the police station abruptly when confronted with inconsistencies in his account. His sudden departure intensified suspicions. Days later, police announced that Matthew was wanted on charges of abduction with intent to defile. As the manhunt widened, the community's focus shifted. Hope remained that Hannah might still be found alive, but the reality of the situation began to weigh heavily. Investigators worked around the clock. The city remained on edge. The breakthrough in the case came through persistent review of surveillance footage. Investigators mapped Hannah Graham's movements using video from the downtown mall and surrounding businesses. The sequence showed her walking alone, then later in the company of Jesse Matthew. He was seen following her, and at one point, placing an arm around her as they moved eastward. Additional footage revealed Matthew's distinctive orange pants and dreadlocks, making identification easier. He was spotted earlier that night at Tempo Restaurant, where he had also interacted with other patrons. Witnesses described him as behaving oddly, hovering near women, appearing intoxicated. Several people recalled seeing him approach Hannah. Police located Matthew's vehicle, a burnt orange 1998 Chrysler coupe, and obtained a warrant to search it. Forensic analysis began immediately. Meanwhile, authorities released his photo and vehicle description to the public, designating him as a person of interest. The media attention escalated. National networks covered the unfolding case, amplifying pressure. Tips continued arriving. Some individuals reported past encounters with Matthew that raised alarms. Though he had no prior convictions, there were records of past allegations involving sexual assaults at 2 Virginia colleges, allegations that had not led to charges but were noted by investigators. Matthew agreed to meet with law enforcement on September 20th, but left abruptly during questioning. Shortly thereafter, he fled the area. The public was alerted, and a national warrant for his arrest on abduction charges was issued. Investigators widened the net. Surveillance footage captured him leaving Charlottesville, and later sightings placed him in Galveston, Texas. The FBI joined the manhunt, and police agencies across multiple states collaborated in the search. The narrative had shifted from a local disappearance to a multi-state pursuit of a fugitive. Matthew's background came under deeper scrutiny. Though he had been a football player and orderly at a local hospital, his employment history included abrupt resignations under unclear circumstances. These revelations painted a more troubling picture and supported the theory that he had information critical to the investigation into Hannah Graham's disappearance. With Jesse Matthew now wanted on felony charges, the search expanded rapidly. Days after his disappearance, he was located in Galveston, Texas. On September 24, 2014, authorities apprehended him on the beach where he had been camping. He was arrested without incident and held in Texas while awaiting extradition to Virginia. Matthew's arrest marked a pivotal moment. Charlottesville authorities confirmed the charge of abduction with intent to defile, a felony implying sexual assault intent. He was soon transported back to Virginia under tight security. Attention turned to Matthew's background. He had attended 2 Virginia colleges, Liberty University and Christopher Newport University, where he had been accused of sexual misconduct in separate incidents. In both cases, he withdrew from the institutions before formal disciplinary actions were completed. Though he had no prior convictions, these patterns raised serious concerns. Investigators executed search warrants at Matthew's apartment and vehicle. Forensic teams processed clothing, bedding, and digital devices. Authorities remained tight-lipped about their findings, but emphasized that evidence connected Matthew to Hannah Graham. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the deepening gravity of the case. Searches for Hannah continued, with hundreds of volunteers scouring wooded areas, fields, and remote properties in Albemarle County. Helicopters circled overhead. Cadaver dogs were deployed. Though Hannah remained missing, prosecutors and police grew increasingly confident that Matthew was involved in her disappearance. The legal process advanced steadily. A judge denied bond, citing the seriousness of the charges and risk of flight. Matthew, now in custody, retained legal counsel. Investigators worked to strengthen their case, coordinating with forensic experts and assembling timelines based on digital records and surveillance. Still, they lacked one crucial element: confirmation of Hannah Graham's fate. As October approached, law enforcement and the community braced for the outcome of the search efforts, hoping for answers while fearing the worst. On October 18, 2014, over a month after Hannah Graham's disappearance, a search team discovered human remains on an abandoned property in southern Albemarle County. The site was in a rural area along Old Lynchburg Road, approximately 12 miles from the University of Virginia. The remains were found behind a vacant home, scattered across a partially wooded area. Law enforcement secured the scene, restricting access as forensic specialists began a detailed recovery. Personal items, including clothing, consistent with what Hannah had worn the night she vanished, were found nearby. Though the condition of the remains suggested significant decomposition, investigators prioritized identification and cause of death. 2 days later, the Albemarle County Police Department confirmed that the remains were those of Hannah Graham. Identification was made through dental records and other forensic evidence. The announcement closed a critical chapter in the investigation, transitioning the case from a missing person inquiry to a homicide. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be homicide. However, due to the state of the remains, specific details were not publicly released. Still, the manner of death, combined with surveillance, witness accounts, and forensic links to Jesse Matthew, solidified the criminal case. The discovery brought an end to weeks of searching and uncertainty. Candlelight vigils were held on campus and throughout Charlottesville. The University of Virginia community, already shaken, mourned together. Hannah's family, who had remained actively involved in search efforts, issued a statement thanking law enforcement, volunteers, and the public for their support. Investigators deepened their review of forensic evidence found at the scene and in Matthew's possessions. DNA comparisons were conducted, and analysis of clothing fibers and soil samples continued. The evidence would eventually form a cornerstone of the legal proceedings. With the recovery of Hannah's remains, the prosecution was now positioned to pursue the case as a capital crime. Matthew, already in custody, faced an upgraded charge of first-degree murder. Prosecutors weighed whether to seek the death penalty, as the case moved toward pre-trial motions and hearings. Following the discovery and identification of Hannah Graham's remains, legal proceedings against Jesse Matthew intensified. He had already been charged with abduction with intent to defile. Now, with the confirmation of her death, prosecutors added capital murder and first-degree murder charges. The evidence, including forensic links and surveillance footage, formed the basis of the prosecution's case. The legal process moved through preliminary hearings and the formal presentation of charges. Defense attorneys filed motions to suppress certain evidence, including forensic findings and statements made during early interactions with law enforcement. Judges ruled on admissibility while maintaining a tight schedule for pretrial proceedings. Amid public scrutiny and media attention, the court considered whether to pursue the death penalty. Ultimately, prosecutors signaled their intent to do so. However, in 2016, Jesse Matthew entered an offered plea. a legal admission that does not acknowledge guilt, but concedes that the evidence would likely lead to conviction. This plea was part of a deal to avoid the death penalty. Under the terms of the plea agreement, Matthew received 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 2 each for the abductions and murders of Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington. The latter case, connected through forensic evidence, had remained unsolved since 2009 until the Graham investigation reopened it. During the sentencing hearing, impact statements from the families were read. They spoke of lives altered permanently by loss, of vibrant young women taken violently. The judge described the crimes as horrific, noting the deliberate nature and devastating consequences. Matthew did not offer a statement in court. He was transferred to a maximum security facility to begin his sentence. For many, the plea agreement brought a measure of closure, sparing the families a prolonged trial and the uncertainty of appeals. With sentencing complete, the formal legal process came to an end. The focus turned to the broader implications of the case, how to prevent similar tragedies, ensure accountability, and strengthen campus and community safety measures. As investigators compiled evidence in Hannah Graham's case, a critical link emerged, one that connected Jesse Matthew to another high-profile disappearance, that of Morgan Harrington, a 20-year-old Virginia Tech student who vanished in 2009 after attending a concert in Charlottesville. Harrington had left John Paul Jones Arena during the concert and was later seen hitchhiking on a nearby bridge. Her remains were discovered months later on a remote Albemarle County farm. Despite extensive investigation, her case remained unsolved for years. Forensic evidence recovered from her remains included a DNA profile, but it had no match in existing databases at the time. That changed in 2014. As authorities analyzed items connected to Hannah Graham, particularly evidence found in Jesse Matthews' vehicle, they developed a DNA match to the unidentified profile from Harrington's case. The connection was decisive. Matthew was not only implicated in the disappearance and murder of Hannah Graham, but now formally linked to Harrington's death. Prosecutors filed charges against Matthew for Harrington's abduction and murder. The DNA evidence was supported by geographic and behavioral similarities in both crimes. Both victims had been young, white college students who disappeared in or near Charlottesville under suspicious circumstances. Both bodies were found in rural areas outside the city. Further review of Matthew's history revealed previous allegations of sexual assault during his time at 2 separate universities. Though neither case led to criminal charges, the patterns were noted by investigators. In one instance, a female student reported being attacked in her dormitory. In another, a student alleged that she had been assaulted off campus. In both situations, Matthew withdrew from the institutions under pressure. In Fairfax County, another case was reopened. A woman had been sexually assaulted in 2005 while walking home from a grocery store. The attacker was never caught, but DNA evidence had been preserved. When tested against Matthew's profile, it matched. This development led to a conviction and life sentence for the Fairfax assault. The emerging picture was that of a serial offender. Matthew's DNA connected him to at least 3 major criminal cases over a span of nearly a decade. His actions demonstrated a predatory pattern, targeting women who were alone, vulnerable, and often under the influence. Though the full extent of his crimes may never be known, the forensic evidence and consistent methods pointed to an individual with a long history of violent behavior. Law enforcement agencies across the state reviewed cold cases for similar patterns. Matthew's conviction and sentencing brought long-awaited answers in cases that had haunted families and communities for years. The disappearance and murder of Hannah Graham, left a lasting imprint on the University of Virginia and the broader Charlottesville community. In the months following the resolution of the case, a series of memorials and initiatives were established in her honor. Friends, faculty, and students remembered her for her intellect, humor, and compassion. Vigils were held, and her memory was etched into campus life through scholarships and public dedications. Hannah's case, along with the linked cases of Morgan Harrington and the 2005 Fairfax assault, ignited state and national discussions about campus safety, sexual violence, and the mechanisms available to address predatory behavior. Universities across Virginia reviewed their internal procedures for handling reports of assault and harassment. The concept of coordinated response teams gained traction as institutions sought better ways to detect and intervene in cases of student endangerment. The case also raised questions about information sharing between universities and law enforcement. Jesse Matthews' prior history at two institutions, both involving serious allegations, had not been fully disclosed or pursued, leaving gaps that may have delayed broader accountability. This led to scrutiny of university conduct policies and calls for legislative changes to protect students more effectively. Virginia lawmakers introduced measures aimed at strengthening background checks, improving campus safety alerts, and ensuring swift action when students go missing. Meanwhile, support services for survivors of sexual assault received renewed investment, and prevention programs were expanded. Hannah's family became advocates for awareness and reform. They participated in public forums, educational campaigns, and legislative hearings, seeking to ensure that their daughter's death led to lasting change. They spoke about the need for vigilance, compassion, and institutional responsibility in preventing violence. Beyond policy, the case affected personal choices for many students and residents. Walking in groups at night became more common, and new safety technologies, such as mobile tracking apps and emergency alert systems, gained popularity. The University of Virginia enhanced its Safe Ride program and expanded patrol coverage near campus. For many, the emotional toll remained. Hannah Graham's story, like that of Morgan Harrington, resonated deeply, not just as a tragic loss, but as a stark reminder of vulnerability and the importance of justice. Though the legal case concluded with Jesse Matthews' conviction, the effects endured in the reforms it spurred, the awareness it raised, and the legacy of two young women whose lives were taken far too soon. In the wake of the tragedy, healing within the Charlottesville community unfolded slowly. The University of Virginia held multiple events to honor Hannah Graham's memory, including academic symposiums, memorial services, and a commemorative bench installed on campus. Faculty members recalled her sharp intellect and curiosity, while classmates shared stories that emphasized her warmth and humor. Counseling services reported an increase in students seeking support. The university responded by expanding mental health resources and reinforcing crisis response protocols. The Office of the Dean of Students worked with student organizations to promote peer-led safety campaigns, emphasizing bystander intervention and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. Community leaders also focused on strengthening ties between the university and local law enforcement. Town halls and safety forums became regular venues for dialogue, allowing students, residents, and officials to share concerns and propose solutions. This collaborative approach aimed to bridge communication gaps that had previously hindered preventative efforts. One of the most significant changes came in the realm of policy. The university overhauled its approach to handling reports of sexual misconduct. Mandatory training for faculty, staff, and students was implemented, covering topics such as consent, identifying predatory behavior, and victim support. Title IX offices received increased funding and staffing, enabling quicker and more effective responses to allegations. Public safety infrastructure saw changes too. Enhanced lighting was added to areas near the downtown mall and popular student routes. Surveillance capabilities were upgraded, and emergency call stations were inspected and repaired. The university promoted use of its alert system, ensuring timely communication in emergency situations. In local schools and community groups, Hannah's story was included in broader educational efforts. Discussions on personal safety, self-awareness, and respectful relationships were introduced at younger grade levels, reflecting a long-term commitment to cultural change. Though the pain of loss remained palpable, the response demonstrated a collective determination to prevent future tragedies. Hannah Graham's life and the circumstances of her death served as both a warning and a call to action. The community's resilience and its resolve to protect its most vulnerable stood as a tribute to her memory. The disappearance of Hannah Graham rapidly became a focal point in national media. News outlets covered the story extensively, providing daily updates, running interviews with family and friends, and broadcasting footage from the search areas. The case's proximity to the University of Virginia, its eerie similarities to earlier disappearances, and the eventual arrest of Jesse Matthew captivated the public and dominated headlines. Media scrutiny was intense. The timeline of Hannah's last known movements, the delays in suspect identification, and the handling of Jesse Matthews' past were all subjects of debate. Commentators questioned institutional procedures, police strategies, and societal attitudes toward campus safety. While some coverage emphasized the emotional aspects of the tragedy, others focused on policy failures and potential reforms. Public interest translated into widespread engagement. Online forums tracked the investigation, and social media became a hub for updates and advocacy. The hashtag #Hannah. Graham appeared across platforms, connecting individuals nationwide who followed the story. For many, it became a symbol of a broader issue: violence against women and the systemic obstacles in addressing it effectively. Advocacy groups seized the momentum. National organizations used the case to highlight gaps in legal protections for students and to campaign for improved prevention and reporting systems. Petitions circulated calling for transparency in university proceedings related to sexual misconduct and demanding more stringent oversight of campus safety practices. The attention also forced difficult conversations about law enforcement practices. The decision not to initially detain Jesse Matthew, despite his suspicious behavior during early questioning, drew criticism. This scrutiny led to renewed training and review of interrogation procedures, particularly in cases involving serious charges such as abduction or sexual assault. While the media exposure brought awareness and accountability, it also raised ethical questions. Some coverage was criticized for sensationalism or for compromising the privacy of those involved. The Graham family, while cooperative with the investigation and supportive of advocacy efforts, requested respect and restraint in the portrayal of their daughter's life and death. Nevertheless, the case had a lasting impact on how universities, police, and the public approach the issue of missing persons, particularly young women. The visibility it received helped initiate real changes in policy and practice, extending beyond Charlottesville and into a nationwide reassessment of campus and community safety protocols. In the aftermath of the Hannah Graham case, educational institutions across the country conducted internal reviews of their safety measures and student support systems. The case highlighted vulnerabilities in how colleges handled reports of sexual misconduct, managed campus policing, and communicated potential threats. The University of Virginia established task forces to examine its response to student safety, particularly concerning late-night activity and off-campus risks. One key recommendation was to strengthen the university's coordination with local law enforcement. As a result, formal partnerships were expanded, including information sharing agreements and joint safety patrols. Training protocols for university staff and student leaders were revamped. Residence advisors, faculty, and administrative personnel underwent new training sessions focused on identifying signs of distress or danger in student behavior. Confidential reporting systems were improved, allowing students to disclose concerns without fear of exposure or reprisal. Nationally, other universities followed suit. Policies regarding student discipline, particularly for individuals accused of sexual assault or harassment, were tightened. Some schools implemented mandatory background checks for staff and student leaders, especially those in residential or athletic roles. Others introduced policies requiring institutions to keep records of unresolved allegations, helping prevent accused individuals from quietly transferring to other schools without consequence. Preventative education gained traction as well. First-year orientation programs began, including modules on consent, safe partying practices, and how to seek help if needed. Universities emphasized peer accountability, encouraging students to look out for one another and to report unusual or concerning behavior. In the broader educational policy sphere, lawmakers responded by drafting legislation aimed at increasing campus transparency. This included requirements for colleges to publicly report crimes and disciplinary actions, conduct regular safety audits, and maintain clear channels for survivors of assault to receive support and pursue justice. The Hannah Graham case served as a stark example of the cost of inaction. Institutions took the lessons to heart, understanding that passive policies and bureaucratic delays could have irreversible consequences. In striving to protect students and create safer environments, universities began reshaping not only their administrative procedures, but also their campus cultures. On a quiet March morning in 2007, the stillness of the neighborhood in Morriston, Swansea, was pierced by a frantic emergency call. Michelle Smith, a 37-year-old mother, had found her 6-week-old daughter, Amy Louise, unresponsive in her cot. Paramedics arrived swiftly at the semi-detached home, attempting to revive the infant. She was rushed to the local hospital, where efforts continued, but tragically, Amy was pronounced dead. Amy had appeared to be a healthy newborn, with no history of medical issues. Friends and neighbors described Michelle as a devoted mother who had spoken proudly about her daughter's development. The news of Amy's sudden death shocked the local community. There were tears, confusion, and a public outpouring of sympathy. Many residents placed flowers and teddy bears outside the Smith residence. Initially, the case was treated as a tragic instance of sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, a diagnosis that, although rare, is still a known cause of death among infants. Michelle seemed devastated, and no one had reason to suspect otherwise. She cooperated with authorities, answering questions and participating in the early stages of the inquiry. In the early days, her grief appeared genuine, and her emotional state seemed consistent with the trauma of losing a child. However, as investigators reviewed the circumstances of the death, certain inconsistencies began to emerge. Medical professionals noted bruising on Amy's body, that could not be easily explained by natural causes or accidental injury. A pathologist report raised the first red flags, suggesting that Amy had suffered injuries consistent with being shaken or struck. Police reclassified the case from an unexplained infant death to a potential homicide. Detectives began a more rigorous investigation, revisiting Michelle's statements and examining her actions in the days and hours leading up to Amy's death. What began as a tragedy began to unfold as something far more disturbing. Forensic teams conducted a detailed examination of the family home. Michelle was interviewed multiple times, and her behavior under questioning began to raise concerns. While initially cooperative, her answers became less consistent. Investigators also spoke with neighbors and relatives to construct a clearer picture of Michelle's relationship with her daughter and any potential stressors or unusual behavior. Though the grief-stricken mother continued to maintain her innocence, the evidence was beginning to build against her. The narrative of sudden infant death was now clashing with scientific findings, and the nature of Amy's injuries called for deeper scrutiny. Behind the outward appearance of mourning, a more complex and troubling picture was taking shape, one that investigators would soon lay bare in court. As the shock of Amy Louise's death reverberated through the community, the South Wales Police intensified their investigation. A forensic post-mortem conducted by a pediatric pathologist revealed troubling findings. Amy had sustained injuries that were inconsistent with any accidental fall or natural cause. There were signs of blunt force trauma to the head and rib fractures that predated her death. These injuries, especially given Amy's young age, could not be dismissed. Investigators also received toxicology results showing no trace of illness or external toxins that could account for her sudden death. These facts narrowed the possibilities and turned the focus squarely onto Michelle Smith. She had been the only adult present at the time of Amy's final hours. The home environment was methodically analyzed. Officers combed through the baby's room, examining bedding, clothing, and any objects that could have caused injury. No items found could explain the force required to produce Amy's injuries. As Michelle's account of the events was re-evaluated, inconsistencies surfaced. She had initially stated that Amy was fine when she checked on her during the night, but later interviews introduced vague timelines and unclear details. Police interviews with acquaintances and neighbors revealed another layer to the case. Though many had seen Michelle as a loving mother, some noted episodes of apparent stress and frustration in the weeks following Amy's birth. A few recalled heated arguments between Michelle and her partner, and concerns about her emotional well-being. One crucial piece of evidence came from Michelle's own computer. During a search of the house, authorities retrieved her personal laptop. Forensic analysis uncovered online searches related to infant mortality and injuries. Some searches had been made in the days leading up to Amy's death. While not definitive proof of intent, the nature and timing of these searches raised serious questions. Moreover, phone records and text messages reviewed during the investigation hinted at a strained home life. Michelle had communicated feelings of being overwhelmed and isolated, though common emotions among new mothers. When considered alongside the forensic findings, they gained added weight in the eyes of investigators. When questioned about the injuries, Michelle failed to provide a satisfactory explanation. She denied harming her daughter and maintained that she had simply found Amy unresponsive that morning. Despite her assertions, the mounting evidence led to a critical decision. Michelle Smith was arrested on suspicion of murder. The charge sent ripples through the Swansea community. The image of a grieving mother shifted to one of a prime suspect. Prosecutors prepared for trial, armed with medical reports, witness statements, and forensic evidence that they believed would show Amy's death was not only unnatural but intentional. The case would now move from the shadows of a home into the scrutiny of the courtroom, where every detail would be laid bare. In the spring of 2008, Michelle Smith stood in the dock at Swansea Crown Court, charged with the murder of her 6-week-old daughter, Amy Louise. The courtroom was packed with journalists, members of the public, and family members, all waiting to hear how the tragedy of an infant's death had led to this moment. The prosecution opened by presenting the pathologist's findings. Detailed images and descriptions were shown to the jury, outlining Amy's injuries, most notably a fractured skull, internal bleeding, and multiple rib fractures. The injuries, the prosecution argued, were indicative of significant and deliberate force, not an accident or medical condition. They alleged that Michelle had inflicted these injuries in a moment of frustration or rage. Attention was paid to the timing of the injuries. Experts testified that the rib fractures had occurred several days before the fatal incident, suggesting a pattern of abuse. This contradicted Michelle's statements that Amy had shown no signs of distress in the days leading up to her death. Prosecutors argued that these earlier injuries demonstrated a disturbing trend that ultimately escalated. Medical professionals took the stand to explain the mechanics of the injuries. They described how shaking or blunt force trauma could cause the type of damage seen in Amy's case. Their testimony was intended to leave no doubt about the unnatural and inflicted nature of the injuries. Michelle's defense counsel painted a different picture. They described her as a mother under intense stress, navigating the challenges of early motherhood without adequate support. They contended that while the circumstances of Amy's death were deeply tragic, Michelle had not harmed her child. The defense attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's interpretation of the injuries, suggesting they could have resulted from an undiagnosed medical condition or accidental mishandling. To counter this, the prosecution presented the computer evidence, a timeline of internet searches conducted by Michelle, including queries about sudden infant death, symptoms of head injuries, and child abuse investigations. The jury was shown the search history, with the dates and times highlighted, emphasizing the proximity to Amy's death. Witnesses testified about Michelle's behavior both before and after the incident. A former partner and neighbors provided insight into her demeanor, with some recalling episodes of anxiety and erratic conduct. One neighbor mentioned hearing what sounded like crying and shouting from the house in the days prior to Amy's death. Michelle took the stand in her own defense. She spoke quietly, often pausing to wipe away tears. She maintained her innocence, insisting she had never harmed her daughter. Under cross-examination, she struggled to explain the inconsistencies in her account of that night and the injuries found on Amy's body. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Each side presented its narrative with determination. Jurors listened intently as they were tasked with the grave responsibility of deciding whether a mother had committed the unthinkable. As the trial neared its conclusion, both the prosecution and defense gave closing arguments. The prosecution urged the jury to consider the weight of medical and forensic evidence, while the defense asked for empathy and highlighted the lack of direct witnesses. The fate of Michelle Smith now rested with 12 jurors, faced with a decision shaped by evidence, testimony, and the silent presence of a 6-week-old victim. After weeks of testimony, expert analysis, and emotional accounts, the trial of Michelle Smith came to a close. The jury was sent out to deliberate, their task as somber as it was critical. Behind closed doors, they reviewed the evidence, the forensic reports, the internet searches, the witness statements, and Michelle's own testimony. It took several hours over the course of 2 days before the jury returned. As they filed into the courtroom, the atmosphere turned electric with tension. Michelle sat motionless in the dock, flanked by her legal team, eyes focused on the floor. Family members from both sides of the courtroom leaned forward, awaiting the announcement. The foreperson stood. The charge, murder, the verdict, guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Michelle did not react immediately. Her face remained blank, as though the weight of the words had not yet settled. A few moments later, her shoulders dropped and her head bowed. Members of Amy's extended family wept quietly, while others embraced, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and vindication. The judge addressed the court, commending the jury for their attention and care in handling a case of such gravity. He then turned to Michelle to deliver the sentence. In a calm, deliberate tone, he spoke of the severity of the crime, the breach of trust, the vulnerability of the victim, and the irreversible nature of the act. He described Amy as a defenseless infant who had suffered fatal injuries at the hands of someone who should have protected her. Michelle Smith was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term to be served before eligibility for parole. The sentence reflected both the seriousness of the crime and the need for justice in the death of a child. Outside the courthouse, statements were made by law enforcement. Investigators expressed relief that justice had been achieved and spoke of the complexity of the case. They acknowledged the difficulty of gathering and interpreting forensic evidence, especially when dealing with a victim so young. Officers highlighted the professionalism and diligence of the pathologists and analysts whose work had been central to the case. Public reaction to the verdict was immediate. News of the conviction spread quickly through Swansea and beyond. Media coverage revisited the early stages of the investigation, the initial theories about sudden infant death, and the turning point when Amy's injuries redirected the entire case. Commentators discussed the significance of the ruling, the strength of forensic science, and the broader implications for child protection. For those closest to Amy, the verdict brought a sense of closure, though not comfort. Her life had been brief, and the loss remained immeasurable. Family members described her as a beautiful baby who had been denied the chance to grow, laugh, and live. Michelle was transferred to a women's prison to begin serving her sentence. In the weeks following the conviction, appeals were considered, but none were immediately filed. Her defense team, while disappointed with the outcome, acknowledged the court's decision and refrained from public comment. In the legal record, the case of Michelle Smith was now complete. But in homes across the country, the story of Amy Louise lingered, a reminder of fragility, responsibility, and the enduring reach of justice. In the aftermath of Michelle Smith's conviction, the community of Swansea was left to grapple with the emotional and societal impact of the case. For months, the tragedy remained a subject of local discussion at schools, community centers, and homes. People questioned how such a devastating act could have occurred without detection, and whether anything could have been done to prevent Amy Louise's death. Child Protection Services in the region initiated a comprehensive internal review. Though Amy had not been previously known to social services, the severity of her injuries and the fatal outcome led agencies to reassess how vulnerable children were monitored. The review examined hospital visit records, midwife reports, and health visitor notes to determine if any early signs had been missed. While no clear indicators of neglect or abuse were found prior to the incident, the review recommended more frequent postnatal check-ins and support for new mothers, especially those showing signs of emotional distress or isolation. Public health officials also took note. In response to the case, awareness campaigns were launched to provide new parents with access to mental health resources, parenting classes, and emergency support lines. The intention was to reduce the risk of similar cases by addressing parental stress before it escalated to dangerous levels. Nationally, the case contributed to an ongoing dialogue about maternal mental health, infant care, and the responsibilities of caregivers. Professionals from pediatric medicine, law enforcement, and child welfare participated in forums to discuss best practices. Although Michelle Smith's conviction was clear in the eyes of the law, broader conversations acknowledged the complex emotional and psychological dimensions that sometimes surround such tragedies. The media, while initially focused on the dramatic elements of the case, later shifted its tone. In the weeks after sentencing, newspapers featured editorials and opinion pieces calling for greater societal support for struggling parents. Broadcasters aired special segments on child safeguarding policies and the importance of early intervention. In the prison system, Michelle Smith began serving her life sentence. Reports indicated that she remained mostly withdrawn, engaging only minimally with others. Psychiatrists assessed her condition, and she was placed under close supervision during her initial months of incarceration. The prison environment, already challenging, was intensified by the nature of her crime. Inmates convicted of offenses involving children often face particular scrutiny and isolation. For Amy's surviving family members, healing remained a long and uncertain process. While the trial had offered a resolution in the legal sense, it did little to ease the emotional burden. Some found solace in knowing the truth had been uncovered, while others struggled with grief that no verdict could erase. On the anniversary of Amy's death, a small group of family and friends gathered at a local cemetery where she was laid to rest. They brought flowers, shared quiet moments, and remembered a child whose life had been cut short. No speeches were made. There was only silence, broken occasionally by tears. Years later, the name Amy Louise would still evoke sorrow, and the case of Michelle Smith would remain a reference point in conversations about justice, accountability, and child welfare. It stood as a painful reminder of the responsibilities adults bear and the systems that must protect the most vulnerable. Though the court had spoken and the sentence was served, the echoes of Amy's life and death continued to resonate. Jessica Gawi was born in San Antonio, Texas, a city rich in history and family tradition. From a young age, she exhibited a deep curiosity about the world and a particular fascination with sports. Growing up in a household where hockey was a frequent topic, Jessica developed a love for the sport that would later shape her professional ambitions. She was passionate, articulate, and determined, traits that stood out in her early schooling years and continued to define her as she matured. After completing high school, Jessica pursued her education with the goal of breaking into sports journalism, a field still largely dominated by men. Her confidence and knowledge of the game made her a natural, and she began carving out a space for herself through internships and freelance opportunities. She adopted the professional name Jessica Redfield, a nod to her spirited persona and love for hockey's red line, and used it as a platform to establish her identity in the media landscape. Denver became her new home in 2012. The city offered more opportunities to grow her career, and she quickly found her place at 104.3 The Fan, a prominent local sports radio station. As an intern, she contributed to game coverage, produced content, and built strong relationships with mentors and colleagues in the sports community. Her voice, both literal and figurative, began gaining traction, and those around her recognized the potential she held. Jessica's work ethic, coupled with her genuine enthusiasm for the game, made her stand out. Her dream was simple yet bold, to become a respected figure in sports journalism. not just as a reporter, but as someone who could influence and inspire. She believed in persistence, often saying that doors would open with hard work, timing, and the right connections. Despite the challenges of a competitive industry, she kept moving forward, driven by her vision and the belief that every game she covered was another step closer to her goal. Jessica also maintained a blog where she shared personal stories, sports analyses, and insights into her journey. This digital space became a canvas for her personality, raw, humorous, reflective, and real. Readers connected with her authenticity, and her following steadily grew. Through her words, it was clear that Jessica was not just reporting on sports, she was living them. By mid-2012, she had begun to see glimpses of the career she envisioned. She was building a name, connecting with audiences, and laying the groundwork for what many believed would be a significant future in sports media. In Denver's vibrant sports scene, she had found both her voice and her place. In early June 2012, just weeks before tragedy would find her, Jessica traveled to Toronto for a brief visit. It was a trip intended for relaxation and a chance to enjoy the city's atmosphere. On June 2nd, she made her way to the Eaton Center, a busy downtown shopping mall, where she planned to grab a quick meal before continuing her day. Jessica entered the food court, browsed the options, and found a table. She sat for a short time, then felt an inexplicable unease. Something about the air felt heavy, the noise a bit too loud. Following her instincts, she stood up, left her table, and walked outside. Within minutes, the food court erupted in chaos. A gunman had opened fire, sending shoppers fleeing in all directions. 2 people were killed, and several others were injured. Standing just beyond the entrance, Jessica watched in confusion as emergency sirens blared and police sealed off the area. News spread quickly, and the reality of what she had narrowly escaped began to sink in. She hadn't seen the shooter or heard the gunfire directly, but the knowledge that she had been moments from danger weighed heavily on her. In the days that followed, she returned to Denver and sat down to write. On her blog, she recounted the experience with clarity and depth. She described how stepping outside may have saved her life, and reflected on the unsettling realization of how random and sudden violence can be. Her tone was introspective but composed, revealing a woman trying to make sense of a near miss that felt too significant to ignore. Jessica's writing struck a chord with many. Her post captured the raw vulnerability that comes with surviving what others did not. She wrote about how the event changed her perspective, making her more appreciative of each day and more determined than ever to pursue her goals. The experience in Toronto had marked her, not just as a survivor, but as someone who had looked death in the face and walked away. That sense of urgency and awareness became a subtle yet persistent presence in her life afterward. Friends noticed a shift in her focus, a keener sense of purpose, a deeper appreciation for the people and moments that mattered. Though she never dramatized her experience, those close to her sensed that it had left a permanent imprint. She had stared down a moment of fate and returned with clarity. Jessica didn't dwell on it. She kept working, smiling, and moving forward. But the Toronto shooting had quietly changed her trajectory, placing her on a path marked by a new level of emotional depth. Life, she had written, could change in a blink, and she was determined to live hers with intention. On the evening of July 19, 2012, Jessica planned a night out with friends. The highly anticipated midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises was drawing crowds across the country, and in Aurora, Colorado, it was no different. Jessica, always eager to enjoy life and share in communal experiences, attended the screening at the Century 16 Theater with her friend Brent. As the crowd filled the theater, the atmosphere was electric with excitement. Jessica took her seat in Theater 9, unaware that a series of tragic events was about to unfold. Around 12:30 a.m., about 20 minutes into the film, a man exited through a side door, propped it open, and returned wearing body armor and carrying multiple firearms. The shooter threw a canister of gas into the theater, filling the air with smoke and confusion. Chaos erupted as he began firing into the audience. In the panic, many tried to flee, duck, or shield themselves. Jessica was struck by multiple rounds. Brent, also injured, attempted to help her amid the gunfire, but the injuries were too severe. By the time the police arrived, 12 people had been killed and 70 others were wounded. The shooter was apprehended in the theater's parking lot without resistance. The scene he left behind was one of horror and disbelief. For many, the violence was incomprehensible, a stark contrast to the ordinary joy of going to a movie. Jessica was among the 12 who lost their lives that night. Her death stunned those who knew her, family, friends, and colleagues who had followed her journey, supported her dreams, and seen her overcome recent trauma in Toronto. The painful irony of surviving one mass shooting only to perish in another was not lost on anyone. The echo of her recent reflections on life's fragility made the news all the more haunting. Her family, notified of her death in the early hours of the morning, were thrust into a nightmare they could neither predict nor prepare for. In San Antonio, grief gripped her loved ones. In Denver, her colleagues and friends mourned the loss of a promising young journalist. Across the country, as the story spread, people who had read her blog post from Toronto now reeled at the news of her death in Colorado. The tragedy in Aurora shattered families and left a permanent scar on the community. For Jessica, whose life had just begun to blossom, it was a final chapter written too soon. She had entered the theater that night with hope and excitement. She left behind a legacy of resilience, compassion, and unfulfilled promise. News of the Aurora Theater shooting spread rapidly across the nation. By dawn on July 20th, 2012, the scale of the tragedy was clear. 12 dead, dozens wounded, an entire community shaken. As reporters gathered outside the Century 16 Theater, names of the victims slowly emerged. Among them was Jessica Redfield Gawi. Her story stood out. Only weeks earlier, she had narrowly escaped another mass shooting in Toronto. Her blog post about that experience circulated widely again, now framed by the grim knowledge that she had become a victim of gun violence after having publicly reflected on its randomness and cruelty. For many, this cruel twist of fate was difficult to comprehend. Public reaction was swift and emotional. Across social media, condolences poured in from friends, fellow journalists, and complete strangers. Jessica's colleagues shared stories of her energy, professionalism, and kindness. Many highlighted her passion for sports journalism and her unwavering drive to succeed. In the days following the shooting, tributes appeared not only from those who knew her personally, but also from public figures moved by her story. In San Antonio, vigils were held in her honor. The local community, where she had grown up and first discovered her love of hockey, came together to mourn. In Denver, sports networks where she had worked remembered her on air, recounting moments of laughter and dedication behind the scenes. The shared grief transcended state lines, touching communities nationwide. Leaders addressed the nation, the senselessness of the violence, the young lives lost, and the haunting nature of Jessica's story became focal points in public discourse. Conversations around gun violence intensified. The tragedy reawakened national debates about firearm regulations, mental health support, and public safety, with Jessica's name frequently invoked as a symbol of lost potential. Her family, though reeling from unimaginable loss, found themselves speaking for the voiceless. In interviews and public appearances, they honored Jessica by sharing her story and calling attention to the broader issues her death had highlighted. Though consumed by grief, they remained composed, emphasizing Jessica's values and the importance of preventing similar tragedies. Jessica's death became part of the broader narrative surrounding the Aurora shooting. Her writing, her dreams, and her tragic end stood as a poignant reminder of how quickly and violently a life could be taken. As the nation grieved with the victims' families, Jessica's words from Toronto echoed in the background. Life is fragile, unpredictable, and immeasurably valuable. The aftermath of the shooting left no one untouched. For those who had known Jessica, the pain was deeply personal. For the broader public, her story brought the human cost of mass violence into sharp focus. In the weeks that followed, amid funerals and memorials, one message remained constant. Jessica Redfield Gawi had mattered. Her life, though short, had been vibrant, purposeful, and full of promise. In the wake of Jessica's death, her family faced a choice: to retreat into private grief or to confront the public realities that had shaped her fate. They chose the latter. From their profound sorrow emerged a determination to act, to give meaning to their loss, and to advocate for change that could protect others from similar tragedies. Sandy and Lonnie Phillips, Jessica's mother and stepfather, became central figures in the national conversation on gun violence. They spoke candidly about their daughter, about the gap she left behind, and about the policies they believed had failed her and the other victims in Aurora. Refusing to allow Jessica's memory to fade into another statistic, they took to the road, attending town halls, legislative hearings, and public forums across the country. Their message was consistent. The system needed to change. With each speech, each interview, they humanized the consequences of inaction. Jessica was not just a name or a face on a screen. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and an ambitious journalist with a voice that had only begun to find its audience. To support survivors of gun violence and their families, Sandy and Lonnie co-founded Survivors Empowered, an organization designed to provide resources, advocacy, and a network for those navigating the aftermath of mass shootings. It was created not just in memory of Jessica, but also out of recognition that survivors often face trauma with little structured support. Through workshops, training sessions, and lobbying efforts, the organization worked to amplify survivor voices and promote reforms aimed at reducing gun-related deaths. Their efforts extended beyond policy. They listened to other victims, shared stories, and built coalitions. For the Phillipses, activism was not an abstract campaign. It was deeply personal and fueled by the memory of a life interrupted. They believed that change would not come from politicians alone, but from communities demanding accountability. Jessica's name became associated with resilience. Her story was used to inspire action and reflection, particularly among those who had previously viewed gun violence as a distant issue. Her family's public presence kept her memory alive and made sure that the tragedy of Aurora would not be forgotten or dismissed as an isolated incident. Through their advocacy, the Phillipses gave purpose to pain. Each speech, protest, and press conference was delivered with the weight of loss, but also with a sense of hope that through action, future lives might be saved. Jessica's story, and the work it inspired, became a rallying cry for those who refused to accept mass shootings as an inevitability. Jessica had written about the value of each day, about living with intention. Her family chose to honor that message by turning their grief into a force for change, by ensuring that the legacy she left behind was not only one of tragedy, but also of transformation. Following Jessica's death, the outpouring of grief was accompanied by a collective desire to preserve her memory in meaningful ways. Across communities she had touched, from San Antonio to Denver, tributes emerged that celebrated her life, her passion for journalism, and her unfulfilled potential. Among these, one effort stood out as a lasting reflection of who Jessica was and what she aspired to become. Her family established the Jessica Redfield Gawi Scholarship Fund to support young women pursuing careers in sports journalism. The idea came naturally. Jessica had worked tirelessly to break into a field that demanded persistence, skill, and often the resilience to push through barriers. The scholarship became a way to carry her legacy forward by investing in others who shared her ambitions. Each year, recipients of the scholarship are selected not just for their academic promise, but for demonstrating the qualities Jessica embodied: tenacity, curiosity, and a deep love of sports. The award supports their education and offers encouragement that their voices are needed in a rapidly evolving media landscape. Through this fund, Jessica's voice continues to echo, not through her own reporting, but through the careers she helps to launch. In addition to the scholarship, memorial events became part of how communities remembered her. Hockey games were played in her honor, fundraisers were held, and moments of silence observed. These were not merely acts of remembrance. They were affirmations of a life that had inspired and uplifted others. In Denver's sports circles and San Antonio's local institutions, her name became synonymous with passion and promise. Jessica's online presence also became a digital memorial. Her blog, once a platform for her thoughts and stories, transformed into a place where others came to reflect on loss, resilience, and hope. Comments poured in from readers moved by her writing, now reading her words through the lens of tragedy. Friends and strangers alike shared how she had inspired them, how her story had prompted introspection, and how they had resolved to live more fully. For her family, these memorials offered a measure of comfort. Amid the ache of absence, they found solace in knowing that Jessica's life had touched many. Her story became a point of connection, a reminder of both the fragility of life and the enduring power of purpose. The scholarship fund, in particular, became a vital expression of continuity. It did not just preserve memory, it projected it forward. Each scholar who benefited from it carried a part of Jessica's vision into their classrooms, their internships, and eventually into the press boxes and media outlets where she had once hoped to be. Through them, her mission lived on. Jessica's life was brief, but her impact was lasting. In the spaces she left behind, others stepped in, fueled by her example. The memorials and the scholarship ensured that what was lost would not be forgotten, and that her dreams would, in a very real way, still come true. After the shooting at the Century 16 Theater, law enforcement apprehended the suspect, James Holmes, without incident. He was found near his car in the theater parking lot, wearing tactical gear and appearing disoriented. Inside the theater, officers confronted the aftermath of a calculated and devastating attack. In the days that followed, attention turned to justice, how to address the enormity of the crime and what would come next. Holmes was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and attempted murder, reflecting the scope of destruction he had inflicted. The legal proceedings began in earnest, initiating a complex and emotionally charged trial that would unfold over several years. For the victims' families, including Jessica's, the process was grueling, a slow, methodical path through a legal system that had to balance due process with the overwhelming demand for accountability. Prosecutors presented a detailed account of the attack, supported by ballistic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and surveillance footage. They argued that Holmes had acted with premeditation, citing the months of planning that went into acquiring weapons, explosives, and protective gear. His booby-trapped apartment, discovered after the shooting, underscored the calculated nature of his actions. The defense, however, pursued an insanity plea. They contended that Holmes suffered from severe mental illness and was not capable of understanding the moral weight of his actions at the time of the shooting. This argument introduced a new layer of complexity to the proceedings, prompting expert testimony from psychiatrists, lengthy cross-examinations, and a courtroom environment charged with emotion. For the families, each day in court was a confrontation with loss. Jessica's family sat through hours of testimony, surrounded by others reliving their own trauma. They listened to medical examiners, survivors, and first responders describe scenes of chaos and pain. The weight of those accounts was constant, and yet they remained present, bearing witness not just for justice, but for the lives altered forever. After months of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Holmes guilty on all counts. Although the prosecution sought the death penalty, the jury ultimately delivered a sentence of life in prison, without the possibility of parole. It was a decision met with mixed emotions. For some, it brought a sense of closure. For others, it raised questions about justice and consequence in the face of such calculated violence. For Jessica's family, the trial marked the end of one chapter, but not the end of their fight. They had hoped that the legal process would offer resolution, but the absence of their daughter remained absolute. What the trial did provide was a detailed accounting, a public record of what had happened and why, and a space for their voices to be heard. The conviction ensured that the perpetrator would never be free again. Yet, for those who had lost loved ones, the impact of his actions extended far beyond a courtroom. The trial served as a reminder of what had been taken, and also of the strength it took to seek justice, not just for one victim, but for an entire community. Years have passed since the night of the Aurora Theater shooting, but its reverberations are still felt in the lives of those it touched. For Jessica Redfield, Gawi's family, friends, and the countless others who followed her story, the impact remains vivid, a reminder not only of a tragic loss, but also of the life and purpose that came before it. Jessica's name continues to surface in conversations about public safety, journalism, and advocacy. Her story is often cited as emblematic of the randomness of mass violence, how quickly it can steal futures and fracture communities. Yet her memory is equally anchored in her vibrancy, her determination, and the light she brought into every space she occupied. The work of her parents has grown into a national platform for survivor empowerment. Through Survivors Empowered, they travel the country, supporting those who have endured similar losses. Their presence at scenes of other mass shootings, schools, workplaces, public events, is both a gesture of solidarity and a stark indication of how frequently such tragedies occur. With every new incident, they offer a voice of experience and empathy, turning grief into guidance. Jessica's scholarship continues to help shape the careers of aspiring female sports journalists. Each recipient carries a part of her legacy, drawing strength from her story and inspiration from her ambition. The fund stands as a testament to what Jessica believed in: fairness, opportunity, and the idea that with enough persistence, anything is possible. For many students, the scholarship is more than financial aid. It is a source of encouragement from someone who once stood where they stand. Beyond her family and profession, Jessica's story lives on in cultural memory. Documentaries, books, and news retrospectives revisit the events in Aurora, often focusing on her narrative as a way to humanize the broader tragedy. Her own words, preserved in her blog and interviews, continue to resonate. They offer insight into a young woman deeply aware of life's fragility, yet full of enthusiasm for what lay ahead. Communities have changed too. In Aurora, public spaces have been dedicated to the victims, including memorials that encourage quiet reflection and collective healing. Jessica's name, engraved among others, is a permanent part of that landscape, a symbol of what was lost and what must be remembered. The conversation around gun violence, while still fraught with division, has undeniably evolved. Survivors and advocates, including Jessica's family, have played a central role in that shift. They have insisted that victims are not forgotten statistics, but individuals with stories, dreams, and families left behind. In every panel discussion and legislative hearing, Jessica's life adds urgency and meaning to those debates. Reflection, for those closest to her, comes in quieter moments, in the laughter of a game she would have loved to cover, in the questions asked by young journalists she might have mentored, in the stillness of an empty chair at family gatherings. The loss never fades, but neither does the imprint she left behind. Jessica Redfield. Gawi's story began with a love of sports, a gift for storytelling, and an unshakable drive to make her mark. It ended too soon, in a theater filled with anticipation and then darkness. But between those 2 points lies a legacy shaped not by how she died, but by how she lived, with courage, with passion, and with a belief that her voice could make a difference. Tiffany Daniels was a distinctive presence in Pensacola, Florida. Born in 1988, she was known for her artistic flair and warm, free-spirited nature. Friends and family described her as a creative soul, someone who danced barefoot, painted murals, and embraced a bohemian lifestyle. She often rode her bicycle around town, sometimes dressed in vintage clothing, with her long blonde hair catching the Gulf Coast sun. Tiffany's life reflected her personality, vibrant, unconventional, and deeply engaged with the arts. She lived in a modest home near Pensacola State College, where she worked as a theater technician. In this role, she handled lighting and stage design, contributing to school productions with the meticulousness of a professional and the passion of an artist. The backstage world suited her, busy, collaborative, yet tucked behind the curtain. Tiffany was particularly close with her colleagues and shared her workspace with a sense of familial camaraderie. Her roommate, Gary Nichols, had recently moved into the house. Their relationship was strictly platonic. Both were independent individuals with different routines. Gary worked long hours and often stayed elsewhere during the week. Tiffany maintained her personal space and lifestyle without interference. She had a history of offering shelter to friends in need, and Gary was no exception. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Tiffany had shown no signs of distress. She spoke with her mother regularly, chatted with friends about upcoming plans, and continued her normal routines. On the weekend before she vanished, Tiffany attended a dinner with her parents and helped paint a set at the college. Nothing seemed out of place. Those close to her found her behavior consistent with who she had always been, kind-hearted, energetic, and engaged. Despite her artistic inclinations, Tiffany was practical. She kept a steady job, paid her bills, and maintained strong ties with her family. She had goals, some centered around travel, others around art. She had once talked about taking a trip out west, or volunteering for a nonprofit. Tiffany was driven by a desire to experience the world, to explore, and to contribute. It was this blend of responsibility and spontaneity that made her disappearance all the more perplexing. Pensacola, while not large, is a city with deep roots and a tight-knit community. People noticed when someone like Tiffany was suddenly absent. She was not the kind of person to vanish without word. Friends recalled how she always responded to messages, always showed up when she said she would. Her reliability made her sudden silence deeply unsettling. The life Tiffany led, a mixture of independence and connectivity, would soon be thrust into public scrutiny. As investigators began to piece together her final hours, they encountered a life full of promise, anchored in a community that deeply missed her. August 12, 2013, began like any other Monday for Tiffany Daniels. She arrived at her job at Pensacola State College in the early morning. Known for her punctuality, Tiffany had shown up on time, ready to begin her work in the theater department. That morning, she spoke with her supervisor and requested to leave early, citing vague personal reasons. She mentioned wanting to attend to something important, though she did not elaborate. Her supervisor agreed, and Tiffany clocked out around 4:43 p.m. She then returned to her home near the college. According to her roommate, Gary Nichols, she was there briefly. He had just returned from a trip and was preparing to leave again. The two crossed paths briefly. Tiffany mentioned she was going out, but didn't specify where. At around 5 p.m., she left the house, reportedly alone, in her gray 1999 Toyota 4Runner. This would be the last confirmed sighting of her. Throughout the rest of the evening, there were no phone calls or text messages from Tiffany. Her usual habits, responding to messages, checking in with family, ceased. By the next day, concern began to build. She failed to show up for work, which was immediately out of character. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Messages went unread. Her parents, who lived in the area, became alarmed. They reached out to her friends, but no one had seen or heard from her since Monday evening. Initially, some thought she might have taken an impromptu trip. Tiffany had a known adventurous streak and had spoken before about wanting to travel, but those closest to her dismissed this idea quickly. She never left without telling someone. She always ensured someone knew where she was going. Her bike, her art supplies, and other personal items remained at her home. By midweek, Tiffany was officially reported missing. Her parents, friends, and coworkers began canvassing the area. They distributed flyers, posted updates on social media, and contacted local news outlets. The local police opened an investigation, though at first there were few concrete leads. Attention turned to her financial activity. Her bank account showed no transactions after August 12th. Her phone records offered little clarity. The last known activity on her cell phone occurred around the same time she left work. No subsequent pings or calls were registered. The trail, at least digitally, ended that Monday. As the hours turned into days, her absence took on a more alarming tone. Tiffany was not someone who simply disappeared. Her parents emphasized that she had plans, a steady job, and no signs of emotional distress. Her car was also missing, adding a troubling dimension to her sudden disappearance. By the end of that week, the mystery had grown. A young woman with deep roots in her community, steady employment, and no known enemies had simply vanished. Investigators began retracing her steps, seeking surveillance footage, and appealing to the public for any information. With little more than a vague timeline and a missing vehicle, the search for Tiffany Daniels was officially underway. Once Tiffany Daniels was officially reported missing, a rapid and coordinated search effort took shape. Her family, notably her parents, took immediate action, partnering with local authorities and enlisting the support of friends and volunteers. Flyers bearing Tiffany's photo and vehicle description were distributed across Pensacola and surrounding areas. Her face, smiling, framed by long blonde hair, began appearing on telephone poles, bulletin boards, and storefronts. The Pensacola Police Department initiated their investigation by visiting Tiffany's home. Inside, there were no obvious signs of struggle. Her bicycle, frequently used for short trips around town, remained in its usual spot. Her bedroom was undisturbed, personal belongings untouched. The only item definitively missing was her 1999 Toyota 4Runner. Authorities flagged the vehicle's license plate in national databases. Detectives interviewed those closest to Tiffany, beginning with her roommate, Gary Nichols. He confirmed their last interaction on the evening of August 12th, describing her demeanor as normal and giving no indication of distress or plans to leave town. Police also spoke with coworkers, friends, and family, none of whom could provide a clear reason for her disappearance. As the community became aware of Tiffany's case, tips began to filter in. Some claimed to have seen her near Pensacola Beach. Others thought they recognized her in nearby towns. Law enforcement chased each lead, but none produced verifiable results. Volunteers formed search parties, combing local trails, parks, and coastal areas. Her parents organized media outreach, appearing on local news programs to appeal for help. They emphasized her reliability and the abrupt break in contact as cause for concern. Social media became a critical tool. Friends launched dedicated pages to share updates, sightings, and support. Her image spread quickly, and public awareness increased. The Daniels family worked tirelessly, updating the public and attending community meetings. Their message was consistent. Tiffany would not have left without telling someone. Authorities issued a BOLO, be on the lookout, alert for her vehicle, and continued examining phone and financial records. Both provided little insight. Her last cell tower ping placed her phone near her home, and no calls or texts were made afterward. Her bank accounts showed no activity. Surveillance cameras at locations she might have visited were checked, but none captured footage of her or her vehicle that evening. With no signs of foul play and few concrete leads, the case hovered in a tense limbo. Police did not declare her a victim of crime, nor did they label her a runaway. The uncertainty frustrated her family and friends, who pushed for more resources and broader investigative action. As the first week passed with no new developments, the case drew increasing media attention. Local and regional outlets covered her story, and missing persons organizations took up her case. A reward fund was established to encourage information leading to her whereabouts. Despite all efforts, Tiffany remained missing. What had begun as a local concern was quickly becoming a larger mystery. The urgency grew, but so did the silence. In those early days, every unreturned call, every fruitless lead, deepened the sense that something was terribly wrong. 8 days after Tiffany Daniels vanished, her gray 1999 Toyota 4Runner was discovered parked at a remote lot on Pensacola Beach. The vehicle was located at the entrance to Fort Pickens, a historic site situated at the far western end of Santa Rosa Island. This location was notable not only for its seclusion, but also because it required deliberate effort to reach, miles from Tiffany's home and off the main highway. Park rangers first noticed the SUV had been left in the lot for several days without moving. On August 20th, they contacted local law enforcement. Authorities quickly confirmed it was Tiffany's vehicle. Inside the 4Runner were several of her personal items, including her cell phone, purse, backpack, water bottles, and bicycle. The presence of the bike suggested she might have planned a ride along the beach's trails, though no one had seen her do so. The contents of the car presented a mixed picture. On the surface, it looked like someone might have left briefly intending to return. The keys were not found inside, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her belongings were undisturbed, and nothing appeared stolen. However, the lack of any clear reason for the vehicle's location deepened the mystery. Investigators cordoned off the area and conducted a forensic examination of the SUV. Fingerprint analysis and DNA samples were taken, but no immediate leads emerged. No unfamiliar prints were found that could point to another person's involvement. The surrounding area was searched extensively, including wooded paths, dunes, and the shoreline. K-9 units were deployed, but they were unable to pick up a definitive scent trail. The vast sandy terrain and the time elapsed since the vehicle had been left likely hindered search efforts. Local surveillance cameras were checked, though the Fort Pickens area had limited coverage. One potential lead came from a nearby toll booth camera, which had captured Tiffany's SUV entering the area around 7:51 p.m. on the evening of August 12th, the same day she left work early. However, due to poor lighting and resolution, it was unclear whether Tiffany was driving. No one was distinctly visible in the footage. The image showed the vehicle but not its occupants, leaving open the possibility that someone else may have been at the wheel. In addition, beachgoers reported seeing a woman matching Tiffany's description, walking along the sand near the Fort Pickens entrance on the night she disappeared. However, these accounts varied, and none could be confirmed as definitive sightings. Some said the woman appeared disoriented or alone, while others could not be certain it was her at all. With the discovery of the SUV, investigators now had a firm location and time frame, but no explanation. The scene suggested intentional placement, yet it was unclear by whom or for what purpose. The car's presence at such an isolated site raised troubling questions. Had Tiffany come there willingly, or had she been brought by someone else? Despite exhaustive searches in and around Fort Pickens, no further trace of Tiffany was found. The SUV provided more questions than answers, and the investigation remained stalled. For Tiffany's family, the discovery marked a heartbreaking milestone, proof that she had reached the beach that night, but no evidence of what happened next. With the discovery of Tiffany Daniels' SUV, law enforcement intensified efforts to reconstruct her final known movements. Investigators began by revisiting her activities on August 12th, attempting to trace every detail between her departure from work and the vehicle's appearance on Pensacola Beach. Despite early assumptions that she may have taken a spontaneous trip or gone for a beach ride, the vehicle's location and its contents suggested a more troubling possibility. Detectives re-interviewed those closest to Tiffany. Her roommate, Gary Nichols, remained cooperative. He confirmed once again that Tiffany had been home briefly that evening and showed no signs of distress. He left the house soon after, and when he returned later in the week, she was already reported missing. His account matched phone records and time logs, and he was not considered a suspect. Tiffany's coworkers described her as friendly and consistent, with no workplace conflicts or unusual behavior in the days leading up to her disappearance. One colleague noted that Tiffany had seemed thoughtful that day, but not outwardly upset. She had spoken about needing to handle something personal, though gave no indication of what that might be. Investigators found no note, email, or digital clue explaining her early departure. Her phone records and social media activity were examined in detail. There was no outgoing activity after the early evening of August 12th. Likewise, her financial accounts showed no recent transactions. She had not withdrawn cash or made purchases, unusual for someone preparing to travel or leave town. Investigators looked into Tiffany's medical and psychological history, but found no indication of instability or prior disappearances. Attention turned to surveillance data. As noted earlier, the SUV was seen passing through a toll booth toward Fort Pickens. The timestamp placed the vehicle at the beach around dusk. However, the identity of the driver remained unclear. No other confirmed sightings followed. This led detectives to consider whether someone else had been involved, either accompanying Tiffany or driving her vehicle without her. In the absence of physical evidence pointing to foul play, the investigation explored several possibilities: accidental death, voluntary disappearance, suicide, or abduction. However, each had complications. The beach was searched extensively, and no body was recovered. Tiffany had no known history of depression or prior attempts to leave her life behind. And while abduction was a possibility, there were no signs of struggle or witnesses reporting suspicious behavior. Investigators also scrutinized Tiffany's recent interactions. No new romantic relationships or conflicts were uncovered. She had a supportive family and social circle. Her phone contacts and messages yielded no indication of clandestine meetings or threats. Some friends mentioned that Tiffany had recently expressed interest in exploring new opportunities, perhaps moving or traveling, but none had heard of any specific plans. As the case grew colder, police began looking at broader scenarios. Could she have encountered a stranger while at the beach? Had she been lured there under false pretenses? Despite appeals to the public, no one came forward with new information. The investigation had reached a difficult phase. With no confirmed sightings after August 12th, no forensic evidence suggesting harm, and no signs of voluntary disappearance, the case remained open and unresolved. The lack of definitive answers only deepened the family's anguish and left the community grasping for clarity. In the weeks following Tiffany Daniels' disappearance, leads began to thin. But then, a new development injected fresh urgency into the case. A reported sighting in Metairie, Louisiana. Roughly 200 miles from Pensacola, Metairie is a suburb of New Orleans. The sighting was made by a waitress working at a restaurant near the I-10 corridor, a route commonly used for cross-state travel. According to the waitress, a woman matching Tiffany's description entered the restaurant in the company of two men. She noted that the woman appeared nervous, avoided eye contact, and allowed the men to do most of the talking. The men allegedly ordered for her and seemed to keep close watch. The waitress was struck by how subdued the woman seemed and how she bore a resemblance to the missing woman she had seen in news reports. Law enforcement followed up on the tip and conducted interviews. The waitress provided a detailed account, including physical characteristics, clothing, and demeanor. She described the men as middle-aged, one with a beard, and both with Southern accents. Despite her vivid memory, there was no surveillance footage available to confirm the sighting, as the restaurant did not have working security cameras in the dining area at that time. The possibility that Tiffany had been taken to Louisiana raised difficult questions. If it was her, how had she gotten there? Was she being held against her will? Could she have been trafficked? Investigators shared the information with local authorities in Metairie and surrounding areas. Flyers were distributed, and law enforcement agencies were put on alert. The Daniels family took the sighting seriously. They traveled to Louisiana, canvassed the area, and spoke with local residents and business owners. Despite their efforts, no additional sightings or information emerged. The tip was considered credible by those involved, but without physical evidence or further corroboration, it remained a frustrating lead that could not be confirmed. Investigators also explored whether Tiffany had any known connections in the New Orleans area. No friends, acquaintances, or known contacts lived there. Her phone records and online activity showed no searches or communications that would suggest a trip to Louisiana was planned or anticipated. Some believed the sighting was consistent with human trafficking patterns, particularly the control dynamic described by the waitress. The Gulf Coast region, including corridors between Florida and Louisiana, has seen documented cases of trafficking activity. Still, no direct evidence linked Tiffany to such a network, and no law enforcement action produced further clues. The sighting remained one of the most discussed leads in the case. It offered a sliver of hope that Tiffany was alive, but it also underscored the possibility that she could be in danger. Despite the significance of the report, the lack of video or follow-up sightings prevented investigators from taking further steps. Back in Pensacola, the search resumed with renewed determination. The family continued to push awareness campaigns, and the police revisited earlier leads to see if any connections could be drawn. But, like many aspects of the investigation, the Louisiana sighting raised more questions than it answered. In the absence of conclusive proof, it became part of the case's troubling puzzle. Another fragment of information suggesting Tiffany may have gone farther than anyone initially believed, but with no way to confirm where or why. As the investigation into Tiffany Daniels' disappearance stretched into months without resolution, one theory began to gain traction: human trafficking. The reported sighting in Louisiana, along with the circumstances of her abandoned vehicle and the lack of any definitive trace, led some investigators and advocates to consider this possibility seriously. Florida is one of the states with the highest number of human trafficking cases reported annually. Its extensive coastline, transient population, and major highways make it a common route for traffickers. The fact that Tiffany's car was found in a remote beach parking lot, her belongings still inside, and the keys missing suggested she may have left with someone voluntarily or under pressure, potential indicators in trafficking scenarios. Tiffany's family began consulting with organizations that specialize in trafficking cases. Experts advise that certain behaviors, such as isolating victims, relocating them quickly, and controlling communication, are typical in such operations. The possible sighting in Métairie, where the woman was seen with two controlling men and appeared anxious, fit the pattern described by advocates. Investigators reviewed Tiffany's background again. She had no history of running away, no signs of mental illness, and no known intention to leave her life behind. Her close ties to family and consistent work ethic argued against a voluntary disappearance. Moreover, no money had been withdrawn from her accounts, and her passport was untouched. Law enforcement officials did not rule out the trafficking theory, but emphasized the lack of direct evidence. No communications, threats, or digital breadcrumbs suggested recruitment or targeting. Still, the case's unusual characteristics, the sudden departure, the abandoned car, and the complete silence, did not fit a typical missing person pattern either. Public awareness campaigns were intensified. Posters and digital flyers began to include possible trafficking scenarios. Tiffany's case was featured by advocacy groups who help identify patterns and victims. Her family also took part in public forums, aiming to educate others on the risks and signs of trafficking. They hoped that if Tiffany had been taken into such a network, someone might recognize her or notice signs in another individual. The theory brought new attention, but also new emotional weight. For Tiffany's loved ones, the idea that she might be alive but being held against her will was devastating. It shifted the tone of the investigation from mystery to urgency. Tips continued to arrive, some prompted by the trafficking narrative. Individuals across the Southeast reported seeing women resembling Tiffany in various cities. Each tip was logged, reviewed, and investigated where possible. Unfortunately, none led to her. Still, the possibility changed how the case was viewed, no longer solely a missing person, but potentially part of a wider and darker web. The trafficking angle also spurred broader discussions about how missing persons cases are classified and investigated. Tiffany's disappearance illustrated the difficulty of gathering evidence, especially when no witnesses come forward and no physical trace is left behind. While no direct links to trafficking networks were confirmed, the theory remains one of the most plausible explanations in the absence of other evidence. It keeps Tiffany's case active in both law enforcement and advocacy circles. For her family, it represents both a source of anguish and hope, painful to consider, but offering the possibility that she may still be alive and waiting to be found. From the outset of Tiffany Daniels' disappearance, media played a central role in galvanizing public interest and sustaining momentum in the search. Local television stations in Pensacola first covered the case, highlighting her sudden absence and the unusual circumstances surrounding her abandoned vehicle. As coverage expanded to regional and national outlets, Tiffany's name and story reached a broader audience, bringing attention that would prove vital for maintaining pressure on the investigation. The Daniels family worked closely with journalists, granting interviews and sharing updates. They believed that visibility was crucial, not just for finding Tiffany, but for ensuring that her case remained active. Her parents, both deeply involved in the search, appeared on news segments, speaking calmly but with urgency. Their appeals to the public were heartfelt, urging anyone with even the smallest bit of information to come forward. Social media became a powerful tool. Friends and volunteers launched dedicated Facebook pages, Twitter accounts, and blogs focused solely on Tiffany's case. Posts included photos, maps, descriptions, and updates from law enforcement and the family. Supporters used hashtags and online petitions to keep the case in public view. These platforms also allowed real-time communication of tips and coordinated community search efforts. The case's complexity, no confirmed sightings, no known enemies, and a quiet departure, drew interest from investigative television programs and true crime outlets. Special episodes aired, exploring the mystery of her vanishing and examining the evidence. While these programs brought valuable exposure, they also sparked debate about the presentation of facts and the possibility of sensationalizing the case. Tiffany's artistic background and vibrant personality made her story resonate with many. Online communities of artists, musicians, and travelers rallied around her case. Messages of support poured in from across the country. People shared stories of similar disappearances and urged others to stay vigilant. Some began distributing flyers in cities far from Florida, hoping her image might trigger recognition. The Daniels family also received support from missing persons organizations. These groups help provide expert guidance, media strategy, and connections with other families facing similar heartbreak. They helped ensure that Tiffany's profile remained in circulation with national databases and advocacy campaigns. Despite the attention, managing public interest came with challenges. False leads surfaced, and some individuals spread unverified information online. The family had to navigate a delicate balance between sharing details and protecting the integrity of the investigation. Law enforcement issued occasional statements to clarify developments and discourage speculation. Still, the benefits outweighed the complications. Every article, interview, or social media post extended the reach of Tiffany's story. With each passing year, milestones like her birthday or the anniversary of her disappearance reignited public attention. Candlelight vigils, art exhibitions, and fundraising events kept her memory alive and continued to generate coverage. Media attention did not solve the case, but it ensured that Tiffany Daniels was not forgotten. It transformed a local mystery into a case watched by thousands. For her family, it brought solace to know so many people cared and were willing to help. For investigators, it meant a steady stream of tips, however sporadic. Through media and public advocacy, Tiffany's story became more than a missing person case. It became a shared concern, a rallying cry for awareness, and a symbol of the thousands who vanish each year without a trace. Years after Tiffany Daniels' disappearance, the case remains open and active, though leads have grown increasingly scarce. Despite this, her family has never ceased their efforts. They continue to press for new information, re-engage media attention, and collaborate with both local police and national advocacy groups. Law enforcement periodically revisits the case file. Detectives have re-examined original witness statements, reviewed previously overlooked evidence, and reassessed earlier tips. Advances in technology, such as improved DNA analysis and digital forensics, have offered occasional new avenues. However, no conclusive evidence has emerged that alters the fundamental timeline or clarifies what happened after Tiffany was last seen. Private investigators hired by the Daniels family have also pursued independent leads. Their work has included combing through unverified tips, visiting cities where sightings were reported, and consulting with experts in abduction and trafficking cases. While some tips seemed promising, none could be substantiated. Public interest in Tiffany's case has been sustained through periodic media updates. On anniversaries of her disappearance, news outlets often revisit the story. These moments serve both as remembrance and as renewed calls for information. Candlelight vigils continue to be held in Pensacola. Each event draws supporters, friends, and strangers alike, united in the hope that answers may still come. In some years, new witnesses have come forward. One claimed to have seen a woman resembling Tiffany in a coastal town months after her disappearance. Another said she might have met someone using a name similar to Tiffany's in a transient community. These reports have all been pursued, yet none have led to verified identification. Meanwhile, Tiffany's face remains listed on national databases and missing persons registries. Advocacy organizations continue to share her story, especially in campaigns focused on adult disappearances and potential trafficking victims. Her case is cited in discussions about the difficulties of investigating missing adult women with no immediate signs of foul play. The Daniels family has remained a visible force. They've organized awareness events, participated in forums on missing persons, and worked to promote policy changes to improve response times and resource allocation for adult missing persons cases. Their advocacy is not limited to Tiffany alone, but extends to a broader mission of supporting other families facing similar grief and uncertainty. Forensic reevaluations have occasionally been conducted, particularly regarding items recovered from Tiffany's car. However, no new forensic link has yet emerged. Investigators have acknowledged the challenges. No signs of violence, no eyewitnesses to an abduction, and a location, Pensacola Beach, where transient traffic is common and surveillance limited. Despite the passage of time, the Daniels family continues to believe that someone, somewhere, knows what happened. They have never declared Tiffany dead and maintain hope that she is alive and may someday be found. Their determination is unshaken by the years, and their message remains consistent. We are still looking. We will never stop. The investigation remains open, officially unsolved. Law enforcement encourages anyone with information, no matter how minor it may seem, to come forward. The hope is that a single piece of overlooked information could finally bring clarity to one of Pensacola's most haunting missing persons cases. Tiffany Daniels' disappearance left an enduring mark on Pensacola, a quiet arts-loving woman who simply vanished one August evening, leaving behind a trail of questions but no definitive answers. More than a decade has passed since that day, and yet her story continues to echo across news reports, advocacy campaigns, and the memories of those who knew her best. For her family, the passing years have brought neither closure nor surrender. The search for Tiffany has evolved into a mission not just to find her, but to ensure that others like her are not forgotten. Her parents became advocates for missing persons, sharing their experience in public forums and lending support to other families navigating the same agonizing unknown. The Daniels family often reflects on the moments that defined Tiffany's life, rather than the mystery that followed her disappearance. They recall her laughter, her passion for the arts, her spontaneous spirit, and the warmth she brought into every room. Her memory is kept alive not only through vigils and campaigns, but through the people she touched, colleagues, friends, students, and strangers who were moved by her story. Over time, her case has influenced how missing adult cases are viewed. It highlighted systemic issues, limited resources for adult disappearances, inconsistent coordination between jurisdictions, and the difficulty in classifying such cases when immediate danger isn't apparent. Her disappearance showed the need for swift, serious response regardless of the individual's age or background. In Pensacola, the community continues to honor Tiffany's memory. Her artwork and contributions to the local theater community remain part of her legacy. The annual events held in her name serve as both a tribute and a call to action, a reminder that unresolved cases deserve continued attention. Despite no resolution, there is still hope. Advances in technology, such as improvements in facial recognition and data sharing between law enforcement agencies, offer potential for future breakthroughs. A single new witness, a chance encounter, or a match in a national database could bring long-awaited answers. The Daniels family keeps Tiffany's story visible through a dedicated presence in media and online platforms. They share photos, updates, and messages of resilience, always urging those who may know something to speak up. Their belief that she could still be found drives every effort. In the years since 2013, many have speculated about what happened, but speculation has never been the family's focus. They have remained grounded in facts, committed to truth, and open to any possibility that could bring Tiffany home. Her story is one of loss, yes, but also of love and unwavering determination. It is a case that reminds us of the fragility of ordinary moments and the enduring strength of those who refuse to let someone disappear without a trace. As of today, Tiffany Daniels remains missing, but she is not forgotten. Her name is spoken, her face remembered, and her story continues to inspire action and hope. For her family, the message remains unchanged. We believe, we are looking, and we will not give up. On a quiet evening in March 2009, the town of Tenino, Washington, was shaken by the sudden and unexplained disappearance of 36-year-old Nancy Moyer, a respected employee at the Washington State Department of Ecology and a devoted mother of 2 young daughters. Nancy had spent the day at work and later dropped her children off with their father, from whom she was amicably divorced. That weekend was hers alone. Her last known sighting was on the evening of March 6th, after she had returned home. Neighbors reported seeing her around 9 p.m., appearing calm and in good spirits. A colleague had also noted her leaving work that day without incident. When Monday arrived and she didn't show up at the office, concern grew swiftly. Her absence was uncharacteristic. Law enforcement officers were dispatched to her residence for a welfare check. What they found deepened the mystery. Nancy's car sat in the driveway. The front door to her house was slightly ajar. Inside, lights were on. A glass of wine rested on a table, and the television hummed quietly. There was no sign of forced entry or struggle. Her keys, wallet, and purse were found in the home. Everything in place except for Nancy herself. Authorities began canvassing the neighborhood. Interviews were conducted with friends, family, and neighbors, all of whom expressed confusion and distress. Nancy had no known enemies. She was described as friendly, responsible, and deeply committed to her daughters. There were no clear signs pointing to who might want to harm her or why. The lack of any physical evidence, no fingerprints out of place, no blood, no signs of disturbance, left investigators with few leads. Searches were organized in the surrounding wooded areas and along the nearby Deschutes River. Volunteers joined law enforcement, combing through brush and undergrowth. Dogs were brought in, but the scent trail ended close to the road, suggesting she may have been picked up by a vehicle. Despite intense efforts in the days and weeks that followed, the case offered little for investigators to pursue. Nancy Moyer had vanished without a trace. In the immediate aftermath of Nancy Moyer's disappearance, detectives from the Thurston County Sheriff's Office launched an extensive investigation. Their initial theory leaned toward voluntary disappearance, but the undisturbed state of her home contradicted that. The wine glass, the unlocked front door, and the television left all suggested she had been interrupted during an ordinary evening routine. Investigators began retracing Nancy's final known movements. Interviews with her co-workers, friends, and ex-husband revealed nothing unusual in her behavior. She had made no mention of concerns, threats, or plans to go anywhere. Attention turned to the hours after she dropped off her daughters, an unknown window of time that might hold the answers. Teams scoured her phone records, bank activity, and social media. Her last phone call had been made from her home that Friday evening. Her bank account showed no recent transactions. Surveillance footage from nearby stores and roadways failed to capture any sign of her or her vehicle being moved. Focusing on the neighborhood, investigators canvassed door to door. Some neighbors recalled a car parked near Nancy's home that night, its engine running without headlights. The description was vague, and no license plate was noted. Others remembered hearing voices or a car door slam late in the evening. These fragments of observations offered little clarity. Nancy's ex-husband cooperated fully with the investigation, providing an alibi for the time of her disappearance. There were no custody disputes or known tensions that would raise suspicion. He had been at home with their daughters the entire weekend. Forensics teams examined the house, but the absence of struggle or forensic evidence made analysis difficult. The property yielded no fingerprints or DNA belonging to anyone outside her known social circle. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. Detectives explored potential suspects in Nancy's personal life, including acquaintances and recent contacts. A few individuals were questioned based on prior interactions, but no one emerged as a viable suspect. The lack of physical evidence, combined with the absence of witnesses or digital trails, frustrated efforts to construct a clear timeline. As weeks turned to months, the initial momentum of the investigation began to slow. Leads dwindled, public interest faded. Despite continuous appeals for information, tips led nowhere. Without a suspect, motive, or body, investigators found themselves stymied. By late 2009, Nancy Moyer's case had reached a standstill. As time passed, the search for Nancy Moyer grew quiet. Without new evidence or witnesses, investigators had no clear path forward. The case was officially classified as a missing person, but privately many suspected foul play. Still, without a body, no charges could be pursued and no closure could be offered. Over the years, Nancy's family and friends remained steadfast. Her daughters grew older without answers. Her parents, deeply affected by the mystery of her disappearance, kept her memory alive through public appeals and memorials. Despite the silence, they continued to work with investigators and hoped for a break. Cold case detectives periodically revisited the file. Every few years, new eyes reviewed the timeline, the evidence, and the witness statements. Technological advancements offered some promise. Older evidence was re-examined using improved forensic tools, but nothing significant emerged. The physical scene remained too clean, the electronic trails too faint. Interest in the case resurfaced in 2018, nearly a decade after Nancy went missing. Local media began running stories marking the anniversary of her disappearance. A podcast series covering cold cases in the Pacific Northwest featured Nancy's case, generating renewed public attention. Calls and tips followed, but again, nothing led to a breakthrough. Law enforcement continued to treat the investigation as active. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office emphasized that Nancy's disappearance was not forgotten and asked the public to report anything, no matter how small. They reviewed older tips and re-interviewed several individuals, hoping that time might loosen memories or encourage confessions. Then, in the summer of 2019, the case took a dramatic turn. On July 9th, a man named Eric Roberts, who lived in the area at the time of Nancy's disappearance, made a 911 call. In it, he claimed to have killed Nancy Moyer. The call was brief but clear. His sudden confession shocked investigators and the community. Roberts, a former neighbor, had not been a primary suspect in the original investigation. Though he had been questioned years earlier like many others, nothing had connected him to the case, until now. For the first time in 10 years, detectives had a direct statement tying someone to Nancy's fate. The cold case was no longer dormant. The 911 call made by Eric Roberts on July 9, 2019, marked a critical turning point in the case. In a calm voice, he told the dispatcher that he had killed Nancy Moyer. He described the incident as an accident, explaining that she had been at his home and died during what he claimed was a consensual sexual encounter that escalated unexpectedly. He said he panicked and tried to conceal the death. Roberts was immediately taken into custody and brought in for questioning. Detectives who had worked the case for years suddenly faced a startling development. After a decade of silence, someone was now directly claiming responsibility for Nancy's death. During interviews, Roberts reiterated the story from his 911 call. He said Nancy had come to his house willingly. According to his account, an act of erotic asphyxiation had gone wrong, and in the aftermath, he didn't know what to do. He claimed to have disposed of her body, but offered no specific location or details about how or where this had occurred. Investigators pressed for more information. Roberts' house and property were searched extensively. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Soil samples were taken, and structural spaces were examined. During the search, 2 unregistered firearms were found, leading to weapons charges against him. The confession stunned the community. Roberts had been known in the area, and though eccentric, he had never raised serious concern. His sudden admission created a rush of questions. Why now, after so many years? Why confess only to offer so few details? But just as quickly as Roberts confessed, he recanted. Days after his arrest, he denied responsibility, saying his original statement had been a mistake. He claimed he had been drunk during the call and said he had fabricated the entire story. The retraction complicated matters significantly. Without a body, physical evidence, or witness corroboration, law enforcement faced serious limitations. The confession, once so promising, now stood on unstable ground. Investigators had no solid evidence connecting Roberts to Nancy's disappearance beyond his own, now withdrawn statement. Despite this, interest in the case surged. The public and media demanded answers, and law enforcement intensified efforts to validate or disprove Roberts' involvement. Although he denied involvement after the fact, the details he had initially provided weren't ignored. Even without a clear resolution, the confession had shifted the investigation. After 10 years of silence, Nancy's case was once again in the public eye, and Roberts remained a person of interest. Following Eric Roberts' confession and abrupt retraction, investigators found themselves navigating a delicate situation. While Roberts' initial claim had been clear and specific, his reversal and the absence of a body left law enforcement in a bind. Nonetheless, the confession could not be ignored. Roberts' property became the center of intensive scrutiny. Detectives, forensic teams, and cadaver dogs combed through his home and land. Every structure, crawl space, and storage area was examined. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed in select spots, and areas of disturbed soil were sampled. Despite the scale of the search, no human remains were discovered. During this search, 2 illegal firearms were found inside the home, one of which had a silencer. Roberts did not have a permit to own these weapons. Though unconnected to Nancy's disappearance, the discovery gave law enforcement grounds to hold him temporarily. He was booked into Thurston County Jail on firearms charges, offering a window for further investigation. Detectives sought to cross-reference Roberts' statements with known facts from the case. Some elements aligned. He knew details about Nancy's appearance and routine, and he had lived near her at the time of her disappearance. But the most crucial pieces, where she died, how her body was handled, remained vague and unverifiable. His shifting account undermined his credibility. Despite the lack of physical evidence, prosecutors considered whether to pursue murder charges based solely on the confession. However, without a body or corroborating forensic findings, the risk of proceeding was high. Ultimately, the decision was made not to file murder charges at that time. The confession, while alarming, was legally insufficient. Roberts' release was imminent until another development occurred. On the day of his expected release, he was immediately rearrested, this time on unrelated assault charges involving a domestic violence complaint from a separate incident. It kept him in custody longer, but still didn't bring answers in Nancy's case. Law enforcement remained convinced that Roberts held key information. Detectives revisited old interviews, examined his past behavior, and searched for inconsistencies in his timeline. Meanwhile, public interest surged again. People began calling in new tips, though many proved unhelpful or based on speculation. The case, now reclassified as a potential homicide, remained active. Detectives continued to believe Roberts knew more than he was saying. Whether through fear, confusion, or calculation, the truth remained elusive. But the renewed investigation kept the case alive, and the search for Nancy ongoing. Eric Roberts' confession, followed by his retraction, placed investigators and prosecutors in a difficult legal position. Though his 911 call was specific and voluntary, the absence of corroborating evidence meant that the case could not meet the legal standard required to proceed with a murder charge. The case against him was circumstantial, heavily reliant on a now disavowed statement. In the days following his arrest, Roberts underwent multiple interviews. Detectives tried to determine whether the confession was credible, probing inconsistencies in his timeline and statements. But without a location for Nancy's body or any physical evidence connecting him to her disappearance, the confession stood alone. It could be explained away as a mistake, a fabrication, or a manifestation of mental instability. Prosecutors weighed the options. They knew that filing a murder charge without a body or physical evidence carried serious risks. A failed prosecution could prevent future attempts to try him again, should more concrete evidence later surface. They chose not to proceed with murder charges at that time, opting instead to focus on the illegal firearms discovered during the search of his property. Roberts was formally charged with unlawful possession of firearms. He remained in custody on those charges as legal proceedings advanced. His defense attorney began laying the groundwork for dismissal of the weapons charges, citing lack of intent and arguing that Roberts had not used the weapons in connection with any crime. Just as it seemed he might be released, another case intervened. A domestic violence incident from a separate time and context resulted in new assault charges. Roberts was taken back into custody immediately upon his scheduled release. These new charges were unrelated to Nancy Moyer's case, but they prolonged his detention. Meanwhile, law enforcement and prosecutors continued building their file. Every detail from Roberts' past was revisited. His movements, relationships, behaviors, and any prior incidents that might offer insight into his actions. While none led directly to a new breakthrough, they helped shape a clearer picture of his profile and potential motivations. Legal analysts following the case noted the rarity and complexity of prosecuting someone without a body. Known as a no-body case, such prosecutions require compelling circumstantial evidence. In this instance, the confession alone was not judged sufficient. Without physical proof or additional testimony, the case risked collapse in court. Despite the stalled legal efforts, the case remained open and active. Roberts, though not formally charged with murder, continued to be the central figure in the investigation. Law enforcement maintained contact with him, hoping that with time or pressure, he might offer more information. The community remained on edge. The legal system's limitations were clear, and though Roberts faced charges, the central question, what happened to Nancy Moyer, remained unanswered. The return of Nancy Moyer's case to public attention after a decade of silence stirred deep emotions across the Tenino community. Residents who remembered the original investigation now watched as the story took a new turn, unsure whether it signaled justice or another false start. The sudden spotlight on Eric Roberts reignited debates, speculation, and a collective yearning for resolution. Nancy's family remained composed but resolute. They had endured years of uncertainty, and the revival of the case brought both hope and renewed anguish. Her daughters, now teenagers, had grown up in the shadow of unanswered questions. Her parents, longtime advocates for keeping the case alive, expressed cautious optimism that the truth might finally emerge. Yet, the emotional toll was undeniable. Local law enforcement reaffirmed their commitment to solving the case. Despite setbacks, they emphasized that the investigation was still active. Detectives continued to pursue leads, reevaluate old interviews, and monitor Roberts closely. They also maintained communication with federal agencies, ensuring that resources and expertise remained available. Public interest remained high. Community members attended forums and memorial events held in Nancy's honor. Vigils were organized, not just to remember her, but to maintain pressure on authorities and keep her story in the public eye. Posters and online campaigns circulated once again, asking anyone with information to come forward. The renewed visibility also led to an influx of tips, some new, others resurfaced from years past. Detectives reviewed each submission carefully, looking for connections or patterns. While many proved to be dead ends, a few offered potential avenues for further inquiry, including accounts of past interactions with Roberts that had not previously been disclosed. Journalists continued to follow the story. Coverage ranged from detailed timelines of the case to profiles of those still seeking justice. Documentaries and podcasts amplified the case nationally, attracting attention from audiences unfamiliar with Nancy's disappearance. The increased exposure added pressure to solve the mystery, but it also highlighted the difficulties of building a conclusive case after so many years. Privately, some investigators believed Roberts still held the key. Despite his retraction, the detail in his initial confession suggested knowledge that might not have been publicly known. Efforts were made to re-engage him, whether through direct interviews or informal channels. So far, he had not offered anything further. Though no new charges had been filed, the case remained open. Nancy Moyer's name stayed in circulation, not just as a symbol of unresolved tragedy, but as a reminder of persistence. The question of what truly happened to her lingered, but the community, her family, and investigators refused to let the silence win. Kelsey Smith was 18 years old on June 2, 2007. Recently graduated from Shawnee Mission West High School in Overland Park, Kansas. She was filled with the promise of a summer before starting college at Kansas State University. Known for her strong character, intelligence, and kindness, Kelsey was the youngest child in her family and shared a close bond with her parents and 3 siblings. That Saturday, she planned to spend part of her afternoon preparing for a surprise party for her boyfriend. At around 7 p.m., Kelsey arrived at the Target store near the Oak Park Mall in Overland Park. She intended to buy a gift, a compact disc, before heading back home. Surveillance footage from the store would later show her browsing the aisles calmly, selecting a CD and heading to the checkout. She paid in cash and exited the store at 7:09 p.m. What should have been a routine errand took a sinister turn. Just minutes after she stepped outside, security cameras captured the last known footage of her alive. The surveillance showed a man following her into the parking lot. While the actual abduction was obscured by vehicles, investigators would later piece together that she was forcibly taken as she loaded her purchases into her 1990-era 4-door sedan. When Kelsey failed to return home that evening, her parents immediately grew concerned. It was out of character for her not to call or send a message if delayed. Calls to her phone went unanswered. By late evening, her family contacted the Overland Park Police Department and reported her missing. Responding officers took the report seriously. Given Kelsey's age and reliable history, police treated her disappearance with urgency. By the next morning, a full-scale search had begun. The Smith family held a press conference, pleading for information and the safe return of their daughter. Community members mobilized quickly, distributing flyers and joining search efforts. The case began receiving local media attention, which soon grew into national coverage as the disturbing details emerged. By Sunday, June 3rd, Overland Park Police had retrieved surveillance video from the Target store. They carefully reviewed the footage, looking for clues. Investigators observed Kelsey being shadowed by a man, his image captured clearly enough for public release. Authorities believed he had something to do with her disappearance. The video was soon made public, and a still frame showing the suspect began circulating widely. The search for Kelsey intensified as public interest surged. Volunteers combed through parks, wooded areas, and open fields across Johnson County. Meanwhile, Law enforcement coordinated with federal agencies, including the FBI, to broaden the search and improve analysis of available video and cellular data. Her family remained visible and vocal. Her father, a former police officer and military veteran, worked closely with authorities, giving interviews and attending briefings. His law enforcement background made the family's appeals more poignant and added urgency to the investigation. Just over 48 hours after Kelsey vanished, a crucial development came on June 4th. Her car was discovered abandoned in the parking lot of a Macy's store across the street from the Target. Police cordoned off the area and began collecting forensic evidence. The car appeared undisturbed on the outside, but inside investigators found signs of a struggle. The seat positioning and personal items suggested Kelsey had not left voluntarily. Authorities believed the abduction and car abandonment had occurred quickly, likely within minutes of her leaving the store. With every passing hour, concern for Kelsey's safety grew. The discovery of Kelsey Smith's vehicle brought the investigation into sharper focus. With the car found abandoned and evidence suggesting a struggle, law enforcement shifted their efforts into overdrive. Forensics teams scoured the vehicle for DNA, fingerprints, and any trace evidence that might identify who had been inside. Meanwhile, the surveillance footage from Target became the centerpiece of the investigation. Analysts enhanced the video and identified a man who entered the store shortly after Kelsey and exited around the same time. His behavior was notable. He seemed to follow Kelsey through the aisles without engaging her directly. Investigators described his demeanor as deliberate and measured. After leaving the store, he appeared to wait near the parking lot. The Overland Park police released a still image of the man, appealing to the public for assistance. The image spread rapidly across media outlets. Hundreds of tips poured in, but many led nowhere. The man was not immediately recognized. Despite the lack of identification, the investigation began to zero in on him. On June 5th, an individual contacted authorities, claiming he recognized the man in the surveillance footage and believed it to be a 26-year-old Olathe resident. Acting on this tip, police located and questioned Edwin Roy Jack Hall. Hall matched the physical description from the footage and drove a vehicle similar to the one captured on another surveillance camera, which showed a car entering the Target parking lot just before Kelsey arrived. Detectives noted inconsistencies in Hall's story and behavior. Though initially cooperative, he became evasive as the questioning intensified. The break came when authorities discovered that Hall's vehicle matched the one seen leaving the Macy's lot where Kelsey's car was found. With this match and the growing evidence, Hall became the primary suspect. Police executed a search warrant on his home and vehicle. Inside the vehicle, they found compelling evidence connecting him to Kelsey's disappearance, including her belongings and other physical evidence. Meanwhile, cell phone data placed Hall in the same vicinity as Kelsey at the time of her abduction, and again where her car had been left. Under mounting pressure and faced with the evidence, Hall led investigators to a wooded area near Longview Lake in Missouri, approximately 20 miles from where Kelsey was last seen. On June 6, 2007, officers discovered her body in a shallow creek bed in the park. She had been bound, assaulted, and strangled with her own belt. The discovery brought a tragic close to the desperate 4-day search. Kelsey's family, who had remained hopeful and active throughout, now faced the unbearable confirmation of her fate. The news devastated the local community and drew national headlines. Edwin Roy Hall was arrested and charged with aggravated kidnapping, rape, and capital murder. He was held without bond. At a press conference following his arrest, law enforcement emphasized the crucial role that surveillance footage and rapid public engagement had played in identifying and apprehending the suspect. As the case moved into the judicial system, investigators continued gathering evidence, preparing for what was expected to be a high-profile trial. Kelsey Smith's abduction and murder, committed in broad daylight and with chilling speed, prompted widespread reflection on issues of public safety, surveillance, and predator behavior. Edwin Roy Hall was born in 1981 and had a troubled background that included time in the foster care system. His early years were marked by instability and brushes with the juvenile justice system. Reports later revealed that he had been adopted as a child, but had conflicts with his adoptive family. By his mid-20s, Hall had become a registered sex offender following a juvenile conviction, though he had not come to significant law enforcement attention in recent years. At the time of Kelsey Smith's murder, Hall was married and had a young son. He lived in Olathe, Kansas, a suburban community not far from the scene of the crime. Neighbors described him as quiet and unremarkable, someone who did not draw attention. But beneath the surface, Hall harbored a history of deviant behavior that would come into focus as the investigation unfolded. As police delved into his background, they learned of previous allegations of inappropriate behavior that had not led to formal charges. Court records and interviews revealed a pattern of conduct that, in hindsight, pointed to a potential for escalation. Still, nothing in his adult record had prepared investigators for the brutal and calculated nature of the crime he was now accused of committing. The murder of Kelsey Smith was not an opportunistic act, authorities concluded. From the footage and timeline, Hall had entered the Target store without a clear shopping purpose. His movements suggested he was observing other customers. When he noticed Kelsey, he followed her for several minutes. After she left the store, he appeared to wait momentarily before walking quickly toward the lot. Police theorized that Hall forced Kelsey into her vehicle at gunpoint. Witnesses later recalled seeing a man near her car, but had not realized a crime was in progress. The abduction took less than a minute. Surveillance footage captured Hall's car exiting the parking lot shortly afterward, though the license plate was not visible. After taking Kelsey, Hall drove across the state line to Missouri, eventually arriving at Longview Lake. The wooded area where her body was found was remote and lightly trafficked, especially on weekday mornings. Investigators believed Hall had some familiarity with the location, suggesting it was not chosen at random. The forensic evidence against Hall was strong. Items recovered from his car and home included Kelsey's personal effects. DNA evidence linked him directly to the crime. Autopsy results confirmed that Kelsey had been strangled and sexually assaulted. The brutality and premeditation of the murder left little doubt about the suspect's intent. Public reaction to the revelations was swift and intense. The case struck a nerve in the Kansas City area and beyond. That a young woman could be abducted and murdered in broad daylight from a busy retail center raised serious concerns about safety and predator surveillance. As details of Hall's background emerged, there were calls to review how individuals with juvenile sex offense records were monitored. Critics questioned how someone with his history could operate unnoticed, while others pointed to systemic gaps in post-adoption monitoring and juvenile rehabilitation programs. For the Smith family, the arrest brought a measure of resolution, but no relief. They faced the painful task of preparing for a trial that would revisit in detail the final hours of Kelsey's life. The community, still reeling, began organizing vigils and memorials, determined to honor Kelsey's memory and ensure that her death would not be forgotten. Following his arrest, Edwin Roy Hall was charged with capital murder, aggravated kidnapping, and rape. The charges reflected the severity and premeditation of the crimes. The prosecution, led by the Johnson County District Attorney's Office, began assembling a comprehensive case built on forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and Hall's own statements. From the outset, Hall's defense team faced daunting odds. The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA recovered from Kelsey Smith's body matched Hall's profile. Surveillance footage placed him at the scene of the abduction. Physical evidence found in his car and home directly connected him to the victim. Given the strength of the case, the focus quickly turned to whether the death penalty would be pursued. Kansas law allowed for capital punishment in cases involving aggravating factors, and this case clearly met that threshold. The district attorney announced the state would seek the death penalty, citing the deliberate nature of the abduction, sexual assault, and murder. The decision ignited debate among legal experts and the public, with supporters arguing it was appropriate for the gravity of the crime, while opponents cited broader concerns about capital punishment. Hall initially pleaded not guilty. His attorneys filed several pretrial motions, challenging the admissibility of evidence and raising questions about the jury selection process. These motions were largely denied. The court ruled that the evidence, including statements Hall made to police, had been obtained lawfully and would be admissible at trial. As the trial date approached, negotiations began between the prosecution and defense. Both sides were mindful of the emotional toll a lengthy trial would take on the victim's family. In a significant development in July 2008, Hall changed his plea to guilty on all charges. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to withdraw the death penalty request, and Hall accepted a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, Hall stood in court as the charges were read and confirmed his plea. The Smith family was present, facing the man who had taken their daughter's life. Victim impact statements delivered that day conveyed profound grief, loss, and the enduring pain inflicted on their family. The judge imposed the maximum penalty allowed under Kansas law for the charges Hall faced. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for the capital murder, along with additional life terms for the rape and kidnapping charges. These sentences were to run consecutively. With the legal proceedings concluded, Hall was transferred to a Kansas correctional facility to begin serving his sentence. Though the plea deal spared the family the trauma of a full trial, the finality of the sentence brought only limited solace. For the Smiths and their supporters, justice had been served in legal terms, but the emotional wounds remained. In the aftermath of the case, the Overland Park community reflected on the vulnerabilities exposed by Kelsey's abduction and murder. Discussions emerged around improving surveillance systems, enhancing public safety measures in retail environments, and strengthening oversight of known offenders. The conclusion of the legal process marked a turning point in the story. Attention began to shift toward memorializing Kelsey Smith and exploring how her legacy could lead to changes that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. In the wake of their daughter's murder, the Smith family channeled their grief into advocacy. Determined to ensure that no other family would endure the same helplessness they experienced during the search for Kelsey, they began working to change how cell phone data could be accessed in emergencies. During the initial days of Kelsey's disappearance, one of the key obstacles faced by law enforcement was the delay in obtaining her cell phone location data. At the time, wireless carriers required lengthy legal processes, including subpoenas or court orders, before releasing information that could aid in finding missing persons. This bureaucratic lag cost investigators crucial hours. The Smith family believed that had the location data been released more quickly, Kelsey might have been found sooner. With this belief, they began campaigning for legislation that would allow law enforcement to access cell phone location data without a warrant in situations involving the risk of death or serious physical harm. The The result of this campaign was the Kelsey-Smith Act. First introduced in Kansas, the act required wireless service providers to disclose location data to law enforcement during emergencies without delay. It was a focused, narrowly tailored law that sought to balance public safety with privacy concerns. Kansas became the first state to pass the legislation, with strong bipartisan support. The success in Kansas encouraged the Smiths to advocate for similar laws nationwide. Over the next several years, multiple states adopted versions of the Kelsey-Smith Act. As of the mid-2010s, over 24 states had enacted similar legislation. The act gained support from a wide range of organizations, including law enforcement associations, child safety advocates, and lawmakers across the political spectrum. Critics raised concerns about potential overreach and the implications for privacy rights, but the legislation's limited scope, applicable only in emergencies, helped address many of these objections. The Smith family's advocacy extended beyond legislative halls. They formed the Kelsey-Smith Foundation, dedicated to promoting personal safety awareness and supporting families of missing persons. The foundation conducted educational programs in schools and communities, teaching strategies to avoid dangerous situations and how to respond if confronted with one. Through these efforts, Kelsey's name became synonymous with proactive safety measures and responsive legislation. Her case, though tragic, spurred tangible change that impacted how law enforcement agencies operated in the first critical hours after a disappearance. As the years passed, the Foundation's work continued. The Smiths remained active in promoting the Kelsey-Smith Act at the federal level, seeking to establish uniform standards for emergency data access across all states. Though federal legislation faced more complex hurdles, the momentum built by the state-level laws kept the issue in the national conversation. For the Smith family, each law passed in Kelsey's name was a testament to her legacy and a step toward preventing similar tragedies. While no change could undo their loss, they believed that by transforming grief into action, they were helping others avoid the pain they endured. Kelsey Smith's abduction and murder reverberated far beyond the Kansas City metropolitan area. The public response was immediate and heartfelt, marked by an outpouring of support from both local residents and people across the country. Vigils were held throughout Johnson County in the days following the discovery of her body. Candles, handwritten notes, and flowers filled the lawn of her family's home and the entrance to the Target store where she was last seen. In Overland Park and surrounding communities, residents expressed shock that such a violent crime could occur in a familiar and seemingly secure environment. Many began reevaluating personal safety routines, and local law enforcement agencies increased patrols around retail centers and public areas. Discussions emerged in city council meetings and community forums about enhancing surveillance infrastructure and emergency response capabilities. Local schools, particularly Shawnee Mission West High School, where Kelsey had recently graduated, held memorial services in her honor. Teachers and classmates shared memories of her upbeat personality, academic dedication, and creative spirit. The tragedy was deeply felt among students, many of whom had grown up with Kelsey or shared classes with her. The case also led to significant media attention. News outlets covered the investigation intensively, highlighting the timeline of events, the role of surveillance footage, and the efforts of the Smith family. Cable news networks provided frequent updates, and true crime programs later revisited the case in detail, focusing on the swift police work and the legal reforms that followed. This widespread media coverage contributed to a heightened national awareness of the risks posed by predators in public spaces. Parents across the country discussed the importance of situational awareness, and schools introduced or expanded personal safety education programs. The public began to recognize the value of accessible surveillance technology and rapid data sharing between corporate and law enforcement entities during emergencies. Beyond individual reactions, corporate responses also took shape. Retail chains, including Target, reviewed their security policies and procedures. Although no changes were formally attributed to the case, industry insiders noted a growing interest in expanding parking lot camera coverage and staff training for observing suspicious behavior. Several local nonprofits began offering safety workshops for teens and young adults, using Kelsey's story as a case study in the importance of awareness and preparation. These sessions often included tips on recognizing threats, using mobile technology for safety, and understanding how to react in emergencies. Through it all, the Smith family remained engaged with the community. They attended vigils, gave interviews, and participated in awareness events. Their visibility and willingness to speak publicly helped humanize the case, transforming it from a news item into a personal tragedy that motivated collective action. Kelsey's funeral was attended by hundreds, a testament to the impact she had on those around her, and the connection that people felt to her story. In her memory, scholarships and community initiatives were established. Her name became associated not only with the tragedy of her death, but also with the positive changes that followed. Years after the crime that claimed Kelsey Smith's life, the efforts to preserve her legacy remained active and focused. The Kelsey Smith Foundation, established by her parents, continued to operate with a mission centered on safety education, advocacy, and support for families of missing persons. The Foundation's programs targeted both youth and adults. Presentations at high schools and colleges emphasized situational awareness, personal responsibility, and the use of technology to enhance safety. These sessions often included real-life scenarios and guidance on how to respond if confronted with a dangerous situation. Parents were also engaged, learning how to talk to their children about safety without fostering fear. The Foundation maintained close ties with law enforcement agencies, offering training sessions and supporting the integration of the Kelsey Smith Act in local response protocols. Police departments across the country were encouraged to familiarize themselves with the Act and work with telecom providers to streamline emergency data access processes. Public support for the Foundation's work remained steady. Annual memorial events, including 5K runs and community safety fairs, drew large turnouts. These gatherings served dual purposes, honoring Kelsey's memory and promoting actionable steps that individuals could take to protect themselves and others. Funds raised during these events supported educational outreach and provided resources for families facing the sudden disappearance of a loved one. The Foundation also collaborated with other organizations dedicated to missing persons and victim advocacy. These partnerships strengthened networks of support and allowed for the sharing of best practices. By working together, groups were able to provide coordinated assistance and amplify legislative efforts related to public safety. At the legislative level, the push for a federal version of the Kelsey Smith Act remained ongoing. While a number of states had already passed their own versions of the law, advocates argued that a consistent nationwide standard was necessary to eliminate jurisdictional gaps and ensure quick action regardless of location. The Smith family made multiple trips to Washington, D.C., meeting with lawmakers and testifying before congressional committees. Their message remained consistent. In life or death situations, time is critical. Access to cell phone location data can mean the difference between recovery and loss. The proposed federal legislation mirrored the successful state-level models, allowing law enforcement limited emergency access to location data, strictly regulated to prevent misuse. In communities where the act had already been implemented, it showed measurable impact. Several missing persons cases saw quicker resolutions thanks to the expedited data access. Law enforcement officials cited the legislation as a valuable tool in emergency response arsenals. Through these efforts, Kelsey's story continued to shape public safety policy and cultural awareness. Her name became associated with action, reform, and education. The pain of her loss had been transformed into a sustained effort to make others safer. The Smith family's resilience and determination became a model for advocacy born from tragedy. By refusing to let their daughter be defined solely by her death, they ensured that her story would have lasting meaning, one that extended beyond Kansas and touched lives across the country. More than a decade after Kelsey Smith's murder, her story remains a symbol of both the fragility of life and the strength of community resolve. Her legacy endures not only in the laws passed in her name, but in the continued remembrance by those who knew her, and the thousands who came to know of her through the case. Each year, on the anniversary of her abduction, the Smith family hosts a memorial event. These gatherings bring together friends, supporters, and community members to reflect on Kelsey's life and the impact she has made. The events serve as moments of collective remembrance and reaffirm the commitment to her legacy of safety advocacy and public engagement. Her former high school maintains a scholarship fund in her name, awarded annually to students who demonstrate the qualities that Kelsey exemplified: kindness, leadership, and dedication to others. The fund not only honors her memory, but also supports the educational journeys of young people in her community, continuing the aspirations that Kelsey never had the chance to fulfill. The Kelsey Smith Foundation's educational outreach has grown to reach schools and organizations in states beyond Kansas. These sessions are led by professionals trained to discuss personal safety with sensitivity and clarity. The message is simple: awareness can save lives. Participants learn to recognize risk factors, trust their instincts, and take practical precautions in daily life. While much of the public conversation has centered on safety reform, Kelsey's story also sparked deeper discussions about criminal rehabilitation, early intervention, and systemic support. Edwin Roy Hall's background, marked by instability, early offenses, and eventual escalation, prompted scrutiny of how the criminal justice system addresses juvenile offenders with violent histories. Though the focus remained on justice for Kelsey, the broader questions raised by the case continued to influence policy debates. In the years since the crime, Kelsey's parents have balanced their roles as advocates with the private grief of losing a child. In interviews, they have spoken about the enduring pain, the moments that remain difficult, and the milestones that pass without her. Yet, they also speak with pride about what has been achieved in her memory, and the countless people who have been inspired to make a difference because of her. Law enforcement agencies across the U.S. continue to reference the Kelsey Smith case as an example of rapid, coordinated investigative response. Training modules for officers now often include lessons drawn from her disappearance, emphasizing the value of surveillance footage, community alerts, and the critical role of cell phone data in the early stages of a missing person investigation. Kelsey's story also resonates with other families affected by violent crime. Her case is frequently cited in advocacy work around victims' rights, and her name is mentioned at vigils and support group meetings, a reminder that behind every statistic is a person, a life, a family, a future lost. As time goes on, the pain of Kelsey's loss remains, but so too does the strength of her legacy. The community that mourned her has grown into a network of action, from state houses to school auditoriums, from police briefings to parental conversations at the dinner table. The lessons of her story continue to echo. Through legislation, education, and remembrance, Kelsey Smith's life continues to shape the world she left behind. A world more aware, more responsive, and more determined to protect those who may otherwise be vulnerable. Shannon Gilbert, a 24-year-old aspiring actress and Craigslist escort, arrived at Oak Beach, Long Island on the night of May 1st, 2010, accompanied by her driver and security escort, Michael Pack. They reached the gated community just before 2 a.m., heading to the residence of Joseph Brewer, a client who had arranged her services. According to Brewer, their encounter began without issue, but quickly turned erratic. He would later report that Shannon began acting paranoid, claiming, "They're trying to kill me," before fleeing the house in a state of panic. At approximately 4:51 a.m., Shannon made a frantic 911 call that lasted over 21 minutes. Her voice, described as distressed and fearful, captured her repeated pleas for help. She claimed someone was trying to harm her, but did not provide her precise location. The transcript, later made public, revealed a chaotic series of interactions. Shannon knocking on neighbors' doors, running through yards, and seemingly evading someone she believed was chasing her. One of the residents she encountered was Gus Coletti, a retired insurance adjuster. Awakened by the noise, Coletti saw Shannon outside, appearing confused and disoriented. When he offered assistance, she ran off again. Coletti then called 911 himself, reporting the strange behavior. Shannon's driver, Michael Pack, also attempted to locate her after she left Brewer's residence, driving around the neighborhood and speaking with residents. He too called 911, trying to report her disappearance. Despite multiple 911 calls, no immediate police response occurred. Officers were not dispatched until hours later, and even then, their search appeared limited. The last known sighting of Shannon was her disappearance into the nearby marshland behind the homes on Oak Beach Drive, an area thick with reeds, waterlogged terrain, and little visibility. By morning, Shannon was missing. Neither she nor her phone could be located. Her belongings, including her purse, shoes, and cell phone, had been left behind. The Suffolk County Police Department initially treated the incident as a missing person case rather than a potential crime, suggesting she may have been under the influence or experiencing a mental health episode. In the days that followed, her family pushed for a comprehensive search. Her mother, Mary Gilbert, traveled from upstate New York to pressure law enforcement into action. She insisted that Shannon would not have vanished without cause and criticized the authorities for their slow and limited response. It would take months before a thorough search of the area was conducted, months in which crucial evidence may have been lost or obscured. Shannon Gilbert's disappearance was initially treated as an isolated event. No one could have predicted that her vanishing would soon lead investigators to one of the most chilling serial murder investigations in recent Long Island history. In the weeks following Shannon Gilbert's disappearance, the urgency of the search remained inconsistent. The Suffolk County Police Department maintained that Shannon had likely run into the marsh in a disoriented state and succumbed to the elements. Her family, however, remained unconvinced by this explanation and believed foul play was involved. Marie Gilbert, determined and vocal, became the driving force behind keeping the investigation alive. Initially, efforts to locate Shannon were limited to surface-level searches of the Oak Beach community and its surrounding areas. Police conducted minimal canvassing and offered little transparency. The marshlands behind Oak Beach were thick, unstable, and treacherous, hampering efforts. Search dogs and aerial surveillance were not immediately employed, and the community grew frustrated with the lack of progress. By June 2010, over a month after Shannon vanished, the Gilbert family began organizing their own searches. Volunteers joined them in combing through underbrush, fields, and beachfronts, holding up photos and asking for any information. Their search was personal and persistent, marked by tension with local authorities who continued to downplay the possibility of criminal activity. In October 2010, Suffolk County Police began a more structured search. Utilizing cadaver dogs, they swept the stretch along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach, several miles from Oak Beach. It was not Shannon Gilbert they found first. Instead, the remains of another woman, wrapped in burlap, were discovered on December 11, 2010. Days later, 3 more sets of remains were located nearby. All women, all appearing to have similar backgrounds and wrapped in similar fashion. These findings shifted the entire scope of the investigation. What had started as a search for one missing woman now suggested the work of a serial killer. Shannon's case, originally treated as a standalone incident, was now being viewed within the context of a broader, darker pattern. Despite this, police still maintain that Shannon's case might be unrelated to the others due to differences in how and where she had disappeared. Nevertheless, the discoveries intensified the search effort. Law enforcement returned to the area with increased resources, including the FBI, who assisted with forensic analysis and profiling. The Ocean Parkway area from Gilgo Beach to Oak Beach became a primary focus. Over the next few months, more remains would surface, some partial, some unidentified, deepening the mystery and the complexity of the investigation. Despite this expansion, Shannon Gilbert's whereabouts remained unknown. Her family continued to believe that her disappearance was directly connected to the discovered remains. The pressure from the Gilbert family and growing public interest kept the case in the spotlight. Mari Gilbert, speaking at vigils and in interviews, repeatedly demanded that authorities take Shannon's case seriously and consider it part of the larger Gilgo Beach pattern. The search had begun with a single missing woman and evolved into a sprawling investigation into multiple murders. But for Mari Gilbert and her family, the focus never changed, finding out what happened to Shannon. The discovery of 4 sets of human remains in December 2010 along Ocean Parkway marked the beginning of what would become known as the Gilgo Beach Murders. All 4 victims, Amberlynn Costello, Maureen Brainard Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Melissa Barthélemy, were young women who had worked as escorts and advertised their services online. They had gone missing between 2007 and 2010. Each had been wrapped in burlap, a detail that immediately suggested a single perpetrator. Their remains were located within a quarter-mile stretch of thick brush on the north side of the parkway, near Gilgo Beach. The similarity in the manner of disposal and victim profile pointed law enforcement toward the likelihood of a serial killer. Police publicly acknowledged that possibility and began referring to the unidentified suspect as the Gilgo Beach serial killer. This revelation transformed the case. The investigation, initially centered around a missing person, expanded to a hunt for a potentially long-active predator. A task force was assembled, drawing from Suffolk County Police, New York State Police, and the FBI. Investigators combed through missing persons reports, cell phone records, and digital footprints, searching for links between the victims. In March and April 2011, further searches along Ocean Parkway led to the discovery of 6 more sets of remains. These included partial remains of previously unidentified victims, a toddler, and a man dressed in women's clothing. Some remains found in this phase were later connected to body parts discovered in other locations years earlier, including in Manorville and Fire Island. The complexity of the case deepened with each discovery. While the original 4 victims shared clear similarities, age, profession, means of contact, the subsequent victims varied more widely in age, gender, and apparent background. The possibility of multiple killers was raised, though no consensus emerged among investigators. As the media spotlight intensified, law enforcement provided sporadic updates. The pace of the investigation remained slow, with limited leads and few breakthroughs. Criticism mounted over the handling of the case, especially from the families of the victims. Questions surfaced about why it had taken so long to connect the missing persons cases and whether more could have been done to prevent further killings. Throughout this period, Shannon Gilbert's disappearance remained a focal point. Though she was not among the 4 initial victims found in December 2010, her case had sparked the search that uncovered them. Still, police maintained that her case might be separate due to behavioral and geographical differences. The Gilbert family continued to challenge this assessment, arguing that Shannon's fate was inseparable from the broader investigation. The uncovering of the Gilgo Beach murders signaled the presence of a serial offender, someone methodical and deliberate, who had exploited the vulnerabilities of their victims and the anonymity of the online sex trade. It also revealed systemic gaps in how missing persons cases were handled, especially those involving sex workers, and prompted renewed calls for reform in law enforcement practices. Yet, even with the discovery of 10 sets of remains, the identity of the killer remained unknown. The investigation had widened, but the mystery had only deepened. The identification of the 4 women discovered in December 2010, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, offered early structure to the sprawling Gilgo Beach case. All had been reported missing years earlier and shared key similarities. They were in their 20s, worked as online escorts, and had disappeared after arranging client meetings. Each had been found in close proximity, wrapped in burlap, pointing to a singular methodical pattern. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was the earliest to disappear, last seen in July 2007. After traveling from Connecticut to New York City, her family had filed a missing persons report, but little progress had been made until her remains were discovered. Melissa Barthélemy vanished in July 2009. Her case drew attention at the time because her family had received a series of taunting phone calls from someone using her cell phone. The caller's voice was male and untraceable, his words chilling. Megan Waterman disappeared in June 2010 while staying at a hotel in Hauppauge, New York. She had told her boyfriend she was going out to meet a client and never returned. Amber Lynn Costello from North Babylon was last seen in September 2010. Her friends reported that she had gone to meet a client who had contacted her multiple times before her disappearance. The precision in victim selection and disposal suggested premeditation. Investigators believed the killer had a deep familiarity with the area and likely lived or worked nearby. The burlap sacks, rural dumping ground, and care and concealment reflected calculated efforts to avoid detection. As the search continued into the spring of 2011, more remains were uncovered, complicating the investigation. In March and April, a series of grisly discoveries unfolded further east along Ocean Parkway. Some were partial skeletons, others only skulls or torsos. DNA analysis eventually linked several of these remains to known cases from earlier years. One set of remains belonged to Jessica Taylor, a woman whose partial remains had been found in Manorville in 2003. Another set was tied to Valerie Mack, whose torso had also been discovered in Manorville in 2000. Both women had also worked as escorts. The discovery of a toddler's remains, found near one of the adult victims, added another layer of horror. Investigators later confirmed the child was the daughter of one of the unidentified women. The remains of an Asian male, found wearing women's clothing, did not match any known missing persons reports. His inclusion among the victims suggested either an expansion of the killer's victim profile or the involvement of another offender. Despite advancements in forensic techniques and digital tracking, several of the victims remained unidentified. The case data suggested the killer, or killers, operated with deliberate caution and had evaded surveillance. Digital forensics yielded limited results. Burner phones, spoofed calls, and remote meeting locations left sparse trails. The use of online classified ads made tracing interactions complex and often fruitless. In trying to draw connections between victims, investigators focused on shared behaviors, timelines, and the geographical layout of the disposal sites. But the growing diversity among the victims, differences in gender, age, and background, challenged initial theories of a single killer with a narrow type. This variation raised further questions. Were there multiple perpetrators? Was someone exploiting the chaos to commit additional crimes? For the families, the official classification of the victims offered some closure, but no resolution. The identification marked the beginning of long, unresolved grief, intensified by the absence of arrests. Vigils were held along the parkway, photos posted, and names spoken aloud in solemn remembrance. Each name identified was a step forward and a reminder of how many steps remained. By mid-2011, the Gilgo Beach investigation had grown into one of the most extensive serial killer probes in New York history. With at least 10 sets of human remains found along Ocean Parkway and no clear suspect, law enforcement broadened its efforts, bringing in multiple agencies. The Suffolk County Police Department led the operation, supported by the New York State Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A multi-agency task force was formed, aiming to centralize efforts and share intelligence more effectively. Central to the expanded investigation were forensic analyses, digital tracing, and geographic profiling. Authorities reviewed thousands of tips and interviewed known associates of the victims. Cell phone records, GPS data, and digital communications were re-examined. The killer was believed to have used burner phones and anonymous accounts to contact the victims, arranging meetings in a way that left little traceable evidence. The discovery that some remains had been found miles apart, with links to previous cases from the early 2000s, pointed to a longer timeline of activity. Investigators speculated that the killer may have changed tactics over time, or disposed of remains differently to confuse detection. In particular, the cases of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack stood out, with body parts found years apart in widely separated locations, but connected through DNA. The physical geography of the area also became a focus. Ocean Parkway, running through isolated stretches of marshland and accessible only by car, offered a secluded route ideal for discrete activity. The killer's apparent familiarity with the terrain suggested a local connection, possibly someone who lived nearby or regularly traveled the route. Despite the growing scope, progress remained slow. Investigators faced criticism over delays and perceived missteps. Public frustration mounted as months passed without a suspect. Advocacy groups highlighted the vulnerabilities of the victims, many of whom had experienced unstable housing, addiction, or limited support networks. They argued that such factors contributed to a slower initial response and inadequate investigation of missing persons reports. The FBI's involvement brought more advanced resources to the case, including behavioral profilers and cybercrime specialists. Analysts worked to construct a psychological profile of the suspect. The consistent use of burlap, the body placement along a narrow strip of highway, and the targeting of sex workers suggested methodical planning and specific motivations. Yet the profile remained speculative, lacking a clear lead. Parallel to the official inquiry, private investigators and journalists began their own examinations. Marie Gilbert hired an attorney and private investigator to dig deeper into her daughter's case, which she insisted was linked to the other victims. The continued dismissal of Shannon's case as unrelated fueled tensions between the family and law enforcement. Shannon's 911 call, which had not been made public, became a point of contention, with calls for its full release intensifying. The creation of the Gilgo Beach Task Force marked a turning point in terms of resources and coordination. Yet, for all its structural improvements, it yielded few immediate results. The killer, or killers, remained at large. The growing list of victims and lack of suspects fostered a sense of unease across Suffolk County. As summer turned to fall in 2011, search operations began winding down, though investigations continued behind the scenes. The community, once insulated and quiet, found itself under the national microscope. Questions remained unanswered, and each new lead seemed only to widen the scope of mystery. On December 13, 2011, more than 19 months after her disappearance, searchers located Shannon Gilbert's remains in the marshland behind Oak Beach. The discovery came after sustained pressure from her family and months of sporadic search efforts that had intensified earlier that fall. Near a small, muddy inlet, investigators found her skeletal remains scattered in the brush, approximately half a mile from where she was last seen running. Before the body was found, earlier searches had already recovered some of her belongings. In November, searchers discovered a purse, cell phone, jeans, and shoes, all identified as Shannon's. These items were located in close proximity to the area where her remains would later be found. The location raised further questions. Despite extensive earlier efforts, it had taken well over a year to locate her remains in an area within walking distance of the homes where she had been last seen. The terrain where her body was found was particularly difficult. The marsh was dense and unstable, with thick vegetation and water channels. Law enforcement emphasized these conditions when explaining the delay in locating her remains. Search dogs and personnel had previously passed through nearby areas, but the remoteness and shifting tides complicated detection. Investigators quickly announced that there were no immediate signs of trauma on Shannon's skeleton, and preliminary assessments did not indicate foul play. Suffolk County Police suggested that Shannon may have died from accidental drowning or exposure, theorizing that she had become disoriented and succumbed to the elements. The official position maintained that her death did not appear to be the result of homicide. The Gilbert family rejected this conclusion. They insisted that Shannon had been in fear for her life the night she vanished, as evidenced by her 911 call. Her behavior, knocking on doors, fleeing into the marsh, repeatedly saying someone was trying to kill her, did not align, in their view, with an accidental death. Marie Gilbert demanded a full independent autopsy, seeking a second opinion on the cause of death. Dr. Michael Bodden, a well-known forensic pathologist, reviewed the case at the family's request. His findings differed from the initial police assessment. He noted that damage to the hyoid bone in Shannon's neck could be consistent with strangulation, though decomposition made definitive conclusions difficult. The variance between the official and independent findings became a focal point in the public discourse surrounding the case. As the forensic debate played out, the location and condition of Shannon's remains continued to fuel speculation. Unlike the other victims associated with the Gilgo Beach killings, she was not wrapped in burlap, and her remains were not concealed in the same manner. However, the proximity of her final location to where she had last been seen and the circumstances of her disappearance led many to believe that her case remained inseparable from the broader pattern. Despite renewed attention, law enforcement maintained its stance that Shannon Gilbert's death was likely not a homicide. The release of the 911 call remained blocked by Suffolk County officials, further aggravating tensions with the Gilbert family and raising questions about transparency. The discovery of her remains closed one chapter, but opened many more. For her family, it was the confirmation of a loss they had already long felt. For the investigation, it underscored the ambiguity that continued to cloud the case, an ambiguity that, for many, felt avoidable. The discovery of Shannon Gilbert's remains did not resolve the core questions surrounding her death. Instead, it sparked a contentious debate between law enforcement and the Gilbert family, centered on the official cause of death and what the physical evidence truly indicated. The Suffolk County Police Department initially declared her death as consistent with accidental drowning, citing the lack of visible trauma on her bones and her proximity to the marsh where she was last seen. They emphasized that no definitive signs of homicidal violence were present. The area where she was found, they argued, was treacherous and easy to become lost in, especially in a distressed state. Toxicology results were inconclusive due to the advanced decomposition of her remains, which provided no further clarity on her physical state at the time of death. However, Mari Gilbert and her legal team strongly disputed the conclusion of accidental death. She insisted that Shannon's behavior on the night of May 1st, 2010, her panicked 911 call, refusal to accept help, and repeated statements that someone was trying to kill her, could not be explained by confusion or mental illness alone. The family believed she had been chased and possibly murdered. To pursue clarity, the family arranged for an independent autopsy. Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist, conducted the review. Although the condition of the remains made it difficult to determine an exact cause of death, Dr. Baden pointed out damage to the hyoid bone, which could suggest strangulation. However, he acknowledged that decomposition and scavenger activity could not be ruled out as alternative explanations for the bone damage. This ambiguity left room for both interpretations. Law enforcement officials maintained their original position, emphasizing the lack of conclusive proof of homicide. Meanwhile, the Gilbert family seized on the hyoid fracture as evidence of foul play, demanding that the case be classified as a criminal investigation. Adding to the controversy was the prolonged withholding of the full 911 call. The call had lasted over 21 minutes, and while a summary of its content had been acknowledged, the actual recording remained inaccessible to the public and even to the family for years. Advocates and journalists criticized the lack of transparency, suggesting that the call might contain critical details that could alter the understanding of Shannon's final moments. Public opinion was divided. Some viewed the police's stance as reasonable, given the forensic limitations. Others believed that systemic bias and a dismissive attitude towards sex workers had tainted the investigation from the beginning. The handling of Shannon's case became emblematic of broader issues about how victims are treated, how resources are allocated, and how law enforcement interprets ambiguous evidence. Despite continued pressure, no reclassification of Shannon's death occurred. The case remained officially listed as undetermined, neither ruled a homicide nor confirmed as accidental. The family's appeals for a change in status were unsuccessful, By 2015, the case had reached a stalemate. While the remains had been recovered and competing autopsies conducted, the underlying truth about what had happened to Shannan Gilbert remained elusive. The lack of conclusive evidence, combined with sharply differing interpretations, left the case mired in controversy, an unresolved mystery at the heart of an already complex and chilling investigation. In the aftermath of Shannan Gilbert's death and the disputed autopsy findings, Mari Gilbert turned to the legal system in an effort to uncover the full circumstances surrounding her daughter's disappearance. At the center of her campaign was Dr. Peter Hackett, a former emergency services official and Oak Beach resident. Hackett had inserted himself into the case in the early days of Shannan's disappearance, telling Mari that he had briefly cared for Shannan after she fled from Joseph Brewer's home. Mari, alarmed by this revelation, believed Hackett's claims suggested a deeper involvement. She reported that he had called her just days after Shannan vanished, stating that he ran a home for wayward girls and had administered medication to calm Shannan. Hackett later denied making such a call, but phone records confirmed he had contacted Mari Gilbert. The discrepancy raised further questions. In 2012, Mari Gilbert filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Hackett, alleging that his actions may have contributed to Shannan's death, and that he failed to seek help in a timely manner. The suit also accused him of giving misleading statements to investigators and the family. Hackett, who had since moved from Oak Beach, denied all allegations and maintained that his interaction with Shannan was minimal and irrelevant to her disappearance. The lawsuit faced significant legal challenges. Without definitive evidence linking Hackett to Shannan's death, the case relied heavily on circumstantial factors and testimony. The court ultimately dismissed the wrongful death claim, ruling that there was insufficient evidence to hold Hackett liable. Nevertheless, the case kept public focus on the events of that night and the people involved. Throughout this period, Mari Gilbert remained an unwavering public advocate for her daughter. She appeared in media interviews, community events, and press conferences, consistently demanding that Shannan's case be treated as a homicide. She also became a voice for the other families affected by the Gilgo Beach murders, advocating for better treatment of missing persons cases involving sex workers. Mari's advocacy helped push legislation in New York related to the handling of unidentified remains and missing persons. She worked alongside other families and lawmakers to support changes in how such cases were managed, particularly emphasizing the need for improved transparency and coordination between law enforcement agencies. Public interest in the Gilgo Beach case was renewed periodically through documentaries, news specials, and investigative reports. Each exposure brought new attention to inconsistencies in the case and the ongoing failure to identify a suspect. Mari used each opportunity to amplify the call for justice, not only for Shannan, but for all the victims whose cases remained unsolved. Despite the setbacks in court, Mari Gilbert's efforts contributed to a shift in how the investigation was perceived. Her persistence drew national attention and increased scrutiny of the Suffolk County Police Department. Critics accused the department of mishandling the case, failing to act quickly, and possibly overlooking key evidence. Mari's role in the case extended beyond that of a grieving mother. She became a determined advocate whose push for accountability and justice helped ensure that Shannan Gilbert's name would not fade from public memory. Through lawsuits, advocacy, and relentless public presence, she reshaped the narrative from one of passive tragedy to active demand for answers. But the weight of that struggle came with costs, both personal and profound, foreshadowing the heartbreak that would soon strike again. On July 23, 2016, tragedy once again struck the Gilbert family. Mari Gilbert, the tireless advocate who had fought for justice in her daughter's case, was found dead in her apartment in Ellenville, New York. The perpetrator was her own daughter, Sarah Gilbert, who was later arrested at the scene. Sarah, who had a documented history of mental illness, was charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. According to police, she stabbed her mother more than 200 times and struck her repeatedly with a fire extinguisher. Authorities stated that Sarah had called 911 herself following the attack. The details of the scene were disturbing, further intensified by the family's high-profile history. The death of Marie Gilbert sent shockwaves through the community and across the broader public who had followed the Gilgo Beach investigation. Mary had become the most visible face associated with the case, organizing searches, filing lawsuits, and demanding accountability. Her sudden and violent death introduced a new layer of sorrow and disbelief. Sarah Gilbert's mental health struggles had been known to the family and to professionals. In court proceedings, her defense team argued that she suffered from schizophrenia and had experienced delusions leading up to the incident. Sarah claimed she believed her mother was evil and involved in a conspiracy. The court ordered psychiatric evaluations, and her mental competence to stand trial became a central issue. The trial drew considerable attention, not only for the brutality of the crime, but also for the tragic reversal it represented. Mari, who had fought so hard for the truth about her daughter Shannon, became a victim herself. In court, the Gilbert family was once again thrust into the public eye, navigating grief, mental health, and the criminal justice system under the scrutiny of the media. Sarah was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. The court acknowledged her mental illness, but concluded that she was legally responsible for her actions. The verdict offered closure in legal terms, but did little to lessen the emotional weight carried by the remaining family members. In the aftermath, advocates and commentators reflected on Mari's impact. Her death marked a profound loss in the push for justice in the Gilgo Beach case. Those who had worked alongside her emphasized her strength and determination, recalling how she had transformed personal tragedy into public advocacy. Mari had given a voice to victims often forgotten, and her legacy endured in the continued attention paid to the unresolved cases. The intersection of the Gilbert family's personal struggles and the broader criminal investigation highlighted the long shadows cast by trauma and unresolved grief. For many, Mari's murder was not just a family tragedy. It was a symbolic end to one of the most persistent forces calling for justice in a case that remained shrouded in unanswered questions. Even as the Gilgo Beach case remained open, the movement that Mari had led did not end with her death. Others stepped forward, continuing the advocacy she had championed. Yet without her, the fight felt more difficult, the path to answers more uncertain. On July 13, 2023, Rex Hoyerman, a 59-year-old architect from Massapequa Park, Long Island, was arrested in Midtown Manhattan. He was charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, whose bodies were found in December 2010 near Gilgo Beach. Hoyerman was also named the prime suspect in the death of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. These four women, known as the Gilgo Four, were all petite sex workers in their 20s who advertised on Craigslist. Their bodies were discovered wrapped in burlap within a mile of each other. The investigation into Hoyerman began in March 2022, when a witness reported seeing a green Chevrolet Avalanche near the location where one of the victims was last seen. This vehicle was registered to Hoyerman. Further evidence included cell phone records indicating contact between Hoyerman and three of the victims. Additionally, DNA obtained from a discarded pizza crust matched mitochondrial DNA found on burlap used to wrap one of the victims. Following his arrest, Hoyerman pleaded not guilty to all charges and was held without bail at the Riverhead Correctional Facility in Suffolk County. In the months that followed, he was charged with additional murders, including those of Jessica Taylor, Sandra Costilla, and Valerie Mack. The charges against Hoyerman now span from 1993 to 2010, indicating a broader timeline of alleged criminal activity. The arrest of Rex Hoyerman marked a significant development in the long-standing investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders. However, questions remain regarding the full extent of his alleged crimes and whether other individuals may have been involved. The case continues to evolve as authorities pursue further leads and prepare for the upcoming trial.